Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. So I'm welcoming all the participants and the panelists to the scientific and ethical challenges in human reproduction perspectives from EMR. This is a CBEC-EMR Collaborative Hybrid Seminar spread over 2 days, 3 hours each on both days. And I'm particularly happy that our participants are not only from Karachi or from the rest of Pakistan, but we have a very large footprint across the world, and I'll talk about that. In these 2 days, we'll be talking about a variety of things. You've already got the program in detail. I'll just walk you through it briefly so that if you have missed something, you will be able to catch up. So after my brief introduction to the program, Professor Farhat Moazam will do a formal introduction and welcome. That will be followed by a talk on the WHO Bioethics Collaborative Centers in the EMR region by Dr. Ahmed Mandil. He will be our chair for the day for today. The keynote address for today is by Professor Gemal Sarur, who has kindly sent a recorded video, but he will be joining us for live answers at the end of the day during the panel discussion. After the keynote's address and a brief break, we will rejoin in 15 minutes with the theme for the day, which is artificial reproductive technologies in the Eastern Mediterranean region. And we have 3 talks from each of the 3 collaborating centers, which is Pakistan, Islamic Republic of Iran, and from Lebanon. With Dr. Sadia Pal talking from the perspectives from Pakistan, Dr. Sagar Sahilpur from Iran, and Dr. Thalia Arwai, Dr. Hazar Head perspective from Lebanon. This will be followed by discussion, which will be moderated by Professor Farhat Moazam, in which we will also be joined by Dr. Gemal Sarur. So that will conclude the day for today. For tomorrow, we will start off again with a Professor Niveen Abu Rahmil, who will be chairing the session and conducting the session for that day. The first keynote is by Dr. Salman Kirmani about dealing with consanguinity in Pakistani society, a reality that will not go away. This will be followed by the theme for the day, which is genomic challenges. And we have, again, 3 talks. And so the first speaker is going to talk about human genome editing, a framework of governance as produced by WHO. This is Professor Emmanuel Tureling. This is followed by Ms. Fiza Akbar talking about advances in genomics and the challenges of genetic counseling from Pakistan. And these are very particular, not only just to Pakistan, but also to other low middle income countries. She'll be followed by Ms. Swaleha Shekhani. She will talk about genome editing perspectives from Pakistan based on an ongoing study that she's conducting. This will be followed by a panel discussion moderated by Natasha Anwar. Questions will all be compiled through chat and the Q&A box that you have on your screens. They will be compiled on our end by Ms. Swaleha Shekhani. And we will keep them for the panel discussion when we'll put them to the panelists. People in the chat attending online are most welcome to raise their hands, put their questions during the chat on the chat box, and we will take them at the during the panel discussions on both days. And we'll try and keep on time. So just to show you the perspective of what we have actually done, and let me find the our footprint for the seminar. Farid Sahab, where is the, can you share this? What did I end? Okay, so I needed some technical assistance over here. So this you can see on your screen is our attendees spread over the entire world, which is, although this is an EMRO collaborative workshop, we have people from the Americas, people from Europe, of course, people from Africa, within the EMRO countries also, then CRO and Wipro. We have 58 people from Pakistan, from Islamabad, from Karachi, Lahore, Peshawar, Mirpur Khas, Hyderabad, and Gujarat. We have people from Iran, Tunisia, Morocco, UAE, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and Lebanon from the other EMRO countries, and from Kenya, Nigeria, Liberia, Botswana, Uganda, and Zimbabwe, from Africa, from Mexico and USA, from the Americas, and India and Bhutan, from the CRO region. From UK, we have 2 people, and from Turkey, we have 1 person registered. So we're very, very happy. And from China, of course, we have 1 person. So we're very happy, and they're all with a very strong interest in the areas that we'll be discussing, including people who are in bioethics in very serious, significant ways, or researchers, or IRB managers, or OB/GYN people, or people who are involved in genetics. So this is just to let you know that we have a very impressive participants list, over 100, about 100 people, 98 up till now. Now I would turn this over to Professor Farhat Moazam after a brief introduction. Then she will give you a overview of our center and introduce the program, introduce the center to you. Professor Farhat Moazam is professor and founding chairperson of the Center of Biomedical Ethics and Culture at the Sindh Institute of Urology and Transplantation. The center was inaugurated in 2004 and happens to be the only center of ethics in Pakistan. Professor Moazam was previously professor and founding chairperson of the Department of Surgery at the Aga Khan University from 1985 to 1995, following which she was Associate Dean of Postgraduate Medical Education from 1995 to 2000. She proceeded to do her master's in bioethics and then a doctorate from the Department of Religious Studies from the University of Virginia. Her interests in bioethics include areas of research, education with a focus of cross-cultural ethics and clinical medicine. She's also a fellow of the Institute of Practical Ethics and a visiting professor of the Center of Humanism in Medicine at the University of Virginia, and an international fellow of the Hastings Center. And this year, in fact, she was awarded the Hastings Center Bioethics Founders Award. She's also the recipient of the honorary doctorate from the University of Zurich. So over to you, Professor Moazam.
Thank you, Dr. Amir. Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon from the Center of Biomedical Ethics and Culture in Karachi. It's really wonderful to see everybody here today. And I hope those who are here today will also join us tomorrow for the session at the same time. So what we have here today is really a series of collaborative seminars. Our center, which we abbreviated to CBEC, has conducted over the last few years with our colleagues from the Eastern Mediterranean region. This has really been made possible with the remarkable support and the interest of both Dr. Ma and Dr. Rashidian, who are in the Cairo office. So welcome to all of you who are here physically and also online. This particular seminar, I think, is among all the others, perhaps, if not more, in my opinion, more of relevance with what is going on nowadays, which is explosive progress and advances in the science of human reproduction. And more broadly, the challenges that this is raising all over the world, and the issue of the specific nature of the ethical and social and other challenges that we face in this part of the world, due to our increase in the knowledge of the human genome. And in my opinion, while the science has taken off by leaps and bounds, the problem remains that this science has to be implemented in the real life. And therefore, I am really particularly pleased that our speakers, both from today and tomorrow, will take us through what the status is in this part of the world. There are not sufficient voices in the international contemporary bioethics discourse from our part of the world. And so once again, I think this, the two-day seminar that we have is an attempt to correct this absence. The bottom line is that science is progressing very rapidly, particularly in areas connected to the human genome. And in that, of course, comes in specifically the issue of what we can now do with human reproduction. But the issue is that the science is there, but I believe there is insufficient attention on the applicability and of the science in different societies and cultures. So therefore, the speakers for these 2 days are those who are actually people who are out there working in real life. So all of them are those who are at the forefront of the implementation, specifically of the advances in human reproduction. So I do hope that all of you will find this interesting. Dr. Amir has already given you an overview of what we're going to do today and tomorrow. Tomorrow, again, we're staying in the overall scheme of the challenges, ethical challenges in human reproduction. And with very, as I said, cultural issues that we need to be thinking of now that human genetic science is in all our countries, everybody who is either with us here or online. So with that, I'm going to turn the session over to Dr. Mandil. Dr. Mandil?
Before I would like to introduce
yes. Dr. Mandil. Yeah, Dr. Mandil, who's been one of our big supporters and a driving force behind all these seminars. Dr. Amir.
Yes, it is indeed a privilege and a pleasure to introduce Dr. Ahmed Mandil. Dr. Mandil is Coordinator, Research and Innovation at WHO Regional Office of the Eastern Mediterranean at Cairo in Egypt, and seconded from the High Institute of Public Health, University of Alexandria, where he serves as Professor of Epidemiology. He is currently serving as Deputy Executive Director of WHO Eastern Mediterranean Health Journal, which is a very prestigious journal in this region, and supports WHO's work in the area of research for health, WHO Collaborating Centers, bioethics, innovation, and digital health in the region. As the key person actually who is involved very deeply in the 3 centers, collaborative centers in Pakistan, our center here at CBEC, and our center, the Collaborative Center in Tehran at the Tehran Institute of Medical Sciences, and the 3rd center is in Beirut. All 3 centers are being represented in this panel discussion that is to follow also. And he has been played a very key role in keeping all these 3 centers connected to each other and working together with each other also. And this, I think, is one of those examples. So, and as I mentioned earlier, Dr. Mandil will actually be chairing the session and taking it forward for the rest of the day. So over to you, Dr. Mandil.
Thanks very much, Professor Jafari. Thanks very much, Professor Moazam. Thanks to all the members of the CBEC Collaborating Center in Karachi. It's a pleasure and an honor to work with you over the years. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening for participants in this very important workshop across the region and as shown by Professor Ja'fari across the world. It is a pleasure and an honor to be with you here. I bring you sincere greetings of our Regional Director, Dr. Ahmed Mandil, the Director of Program Management, Dr. Rana Haji, and the Director of Science Information Dissemination, Dr. Arash Rashidian, whom you will meet at the end of the workshop tomorrow evening, inshallah. I also bring you the greetings of our colleague, Dr. Arshad Altaf, who is from Pakistan, and he works very closely with me in support of research in the region, including collaborating centers. I actually wish the workshop all the success it deserves. And I have a very brief presentation, which I'd like to share with you. And I was wondering if it could be shared from the CBEC end. This would make it much easier for me, if at all possible.
Yes, Dr. Mandil, we're going to share it from our end.
That's very kind of you. I'm very, very appreciative. So next, please, and please put it on the, yes, exactly. So ladies and gentlemen, WHO for the first time 3 years ago established what is known as a science division, headed by the chief scientist, Dr. Swaminathan, and it includes 3 main departments: digital health and innovation, quality norms and standards, as well as research for health. And the research for health department, for the first time, brought together under one umbrella all entities related to research in WHO, including TDR, the Alliance for Health Policy Systems Research, HRP, and others. Next, please. So basically, I wanted to also tell you that our region, the Eastern Mediterranean, includes 3 non-Arabic speaking countries: Pakistan, Iran, and Afghanistan, in addition to most Arab countries. Next, please. In the regional office of WHO in Cairo, we have 7 departments: health systems, communicable diseases, non-communicable diseases, healthier populations, health emergencies, communication, resource mobilization and partnership, but our own department headed by Dr. Rashidian, science information and dissemination. Next, please. Under this science information dissemination, we have 5 areas of work: research and innovation, publishing, editorial and graphics, evidence and data to policy, library and knowledge sharing, as well as information systems for health. I humbly coordinate the first cluster, which includes research promotion and development, the Eastern Mediterranean Health Journal, as well as digital health and innovation. Under RPD, I work very closely with Dr. Arshad Altaf in support of bioethics in the Eastern Mediterranean region. Next, please. Our unit of research promotion and development supports the 4 pillars of WHO strategies on research for health: meeting health needs through priorities, strengthening health research systems through capacity building, good research practice through standards, and translation of evidence to practice. As far as capacity building is concerned, we actually held a series of workshops on research methods, ethics, scientific writing, and policy brief development in different parts of this region, as well as holding regional workshops. So we held both national and regional workshops in support of different activities related to research for health, including development of collaborating centers. And also, I would like to refer to the work on research governance and standards, which actually has been a core work of the Research Promotion and Development Unit in the regional office of WHO in Cairo. Next, please. Working with collaborating centers is across the board of ethics. So we work on supporting research ethics, ethics in medical practice, public health ethics, publication ethics, and bioethics at large. Next, please. So in publication ethics, I would like to mention that we hold capacity building workshops on publication ethics, like the one which was held back in 19 in Tehran and in 21 in Tunis. Also, the regional journal of WHO, the Eastern Mediterranean Health Journal, has a special section and guidelines for ethical conduct and publication of health research. Next, please. As far as public health ethics is concerned, the work with collaborating centers covers several issues, including ethics in epidemics, public health surveillance, vector-borne diseases, big data and AI, gene editing, as you will see tomorrow, and COVID-19 pandemic. So the collaborating centers in our region has been supporting all these areas of work. Can I have the prior one, please? Next, please. The research ethics is supported through the regional office by being the secretariat of the Research Ethics Review Committee, the Advisory Committee for Health Research, the Collaborating Centers Oversight Committee, and the Association of Medical Editors, better known as IMAMI. So in the RPD unit, we are the actually secretariat of all of the above. Next, please. Now, collaborating centers are institutions designated by the World Health Organization Director General to form part of an international collaborative network conducting activities in support of the organization's program at all levels, globally, regionally, and nationally. So, for example, if an institution is designated as a collaborating center on bioethics in a particular institution like SIUT in a particular city like Karachi, it will be serving bioethics globally, not only nationally in Pakistan. Currently, we have at least 55 designated collaborating centers at large, of which 3 are on bioethics. And I have to mention that we are really proud in this region to have 3 designated collaborating centers on bioethics, because most of the other 5 regions have 1 or 2. So we have been privileged by having 3 collaborating centers on bioethics in our region. Next, please. This slide shows the distribution of collaborating centers across the world as far as bioethics is concerned. We have in our region 3, as I mentioned. The first one is in Beirut on the Salim Al-Hos Bioethics Professionalism Program, hosted by the American University of Beirut Medical Center, represented in this workshop by Dr. Athalia Arawi and Dr. Hazar Haidar. We also have the host institution for this webinar, the Center of Bioethics and Culture, better known as CBEC, which is hosted by the Sindh Institute of Urology and Transportation in Karachi, Pakistan. It has been quite active in support of bioethics activities, not only in Pakistan, but across the region for quite some time. The third center in our region is the Center of Medical Ethics, hosted by the Tehran University of Medical Sciences in Tehran, Iran, Islamic Republic of Iran, represented by Professor Bagher Larijani and Dr. Ihsan Shamsi Gushki. Now, we also have other centers, but in other regions, hosted by institutions in Toronto, Miami, New York, Cape Town, Zurich, Melbourne, and Singapore. So in our region, there are 3 centers out of 12. We are really proud of that. Next, please. Now, the collaboration between WHO and the institutions which host our collaborating centers actually is in support of national ethics and bioethics committees across the region. It also supports what we call the regional bioethics summits of national ethics and bioethics committees. We held 2 so far, one in Muscat in 2017, one in Cairo in 2019, and inshallah, in May of 23, there will be the 3rd Regional Bioethics Summit, which will be hosted by the Omani National Bioethics Committee. Over the years, the collaborating centers have been also supporting global bioethics summits with representation from Iran on the Portugal summit, which was held back in September with a keynote speaker, Professor Farhat Moazam. and participation of different representatives across the Eastern Mediterranean region. And we also have plans for the Global Bioethics Summit, inshallah, taking place in San Marino in 24. And Professor Ahmed Jafari will be sitting on its steering committee, in addition to a representative from Saudi Arabia. So we are planning both for the Regional Bioethics Summit in Muscat in March of 23, and the Global Bioethics Summit in San Marino, Italy in 24, inshallah. Working with the collaborating centers in the region, we also support including bioethics in the curricula of health-related schools. Medicine, pharmacy, dentistry, nursing, allied health sciences, everybody should have in their curriculum, whether undergraduate or graduate or postgraduate, bioethics. This is what we are supporting with the work of the collaborating centers in our region. We also work very closely, including today's and tomorrow's webinar, on capacity building in bioethics, research ethics, and also migration ethics. And I'd like to refer here that we're working closely now with the Beirut Collaborating Center on a monograph on migration ethics. And we are also working with the Iran Collaborating Center in support of clinical ethics in the Eastern Mediterranean region. Working with collaborating centers is also in support of publication ethics, including the importance of intellectual property. We also work very closely towards achieving health-related SDGs 2030, as well as the Eastern Mediterranean Vision 2023, as well as the Global Program of Work 13, which is now extended to 24-25. Very closely working with different institutions across the region, we are supporting the Global Action Plan for Healthy Lives and Well-being, as well as the Regional Health Alliance, which has its Accelerator 6 on RD, access, and innovation, with the support and work of collaborative centers in the Eastern Mediterranean region. Next, please. Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
So thank you very much, Dr. Mandil, for a wonderful overview of our entire region. In fact, just one little clarification that is very close to our heart, which is that CBEC was the first bioethics center in the region, then followed the other two centers. So I thought I should just flag that.
I was going alphabetically, but what you said is true. Thank you so much for pointing this out, which is actually true. Thank you.
Yeah. So particularly pleased about that. So, okay, so I'm now turning the chair over to Dr. Mandil to take us through the rest of the day.
Thanks very much, Professor Jafari. The first presentation today is a keynote address by Professor Jamal Surur. He's going to talk to us about the opinions of Muslim scholars and fuqaha regarding modern reproductive technologies. Professor Jamal Surur is a professor of obstetrics and gynecology and also director of International Islamic Center for Population Studies and Research and former dean of the Faculty of Medicine at Al-Azhar University in Cairo. He is recipient of United Nations Population Award in 2013 and the Nile Prize, which is the highest prize in Egypt, for science in 2018. Professor Surur is a member of the Islamic Research Council of Al-Azhar. He held numerous workshops regionally and internationally in Africa, Asia, in collaboration with the WHO, UNFPA, and UNICEF. He also established the Egyptian Fertility Society and has been its president since 2004. Ladies and gentlemen, it's our pleasure to listen now to a recording of the presentation of Professor Jamal Surur on the opinions of Muslim scholars and fuqaha regarding modern reproductive technologies. CBEC, please show the recording. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'd like to thank the organizing committee for inviting me to talk in this important meeting on the opinion of Muslim scholars and fuqaha regarding modern reproductive technology. During the allocated time for this presentation, I'm going to discuss first the couple of revolutions which happened in reproductive technology, and then universal bioethics and its rooting in Islam, and then Islamic perspectives in human reproduction, including family planning, assisted reproductive technology, embryology, embryo research, testing, and gene therapy, and finally concluding remarks. Professor Mahmoud Fathallah had mentioned that in the 20th century, the world witnessed two revolutions in reproductive technology, which made an enormous impact on current and future generations. The first revolution was the discovery of combined oral contraceptive pills, and this was led by Margaret Sanger, who was a daughter of a Catholic family whose mother died during her 11th childbirth and after 7 abortions. And this revolution in family planning was led by Margaret Sanger and Jory Pincus when they got the approval in the year 1960 of the FDA in the United States on the first contraceptive pills, which was Enovid. The second revolution was in the year 1978, and this was led by Patrick Steptoe and Bob Edwards when Louise Brown was born on the 25th of July 1978 in England. Louise Brown got married and now she has a child. And here is Bob Edwards with the mother of Louise Brown and with the daughter of Louise Brown. These two scientific revolutions, indeed, in reproduction, in reproductive medicine, raised an intense ethical and religious debate globally and particularly in the Muslim world. Fortunately, parallel with these two scientific revolutions, there was a revolution as well of bioethics, which indeed is a blessing, protecting the human welfare and dignity. We all know that the ethical principles, as they were proposed in the late 70s and early 80s by Pitcham, they are an autonomy, which is respect for the person, beneficence, the duty to do good, non-maleficence, the duty not to do harm, and justice, both distributive justice and corrective justice. However, because of the rapid increase in the scientific knowledge and technology, and the impact of this technology on the quality of health service, as well as on the future generation, it became necessary to enormously expand on these ethical principles of the 70s. These 4 ethical principles became no more adequate to cover all ethical aspects of the new development in reproductive medicine. And therefore, the UNESCO in the year 2005 developed the Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights, and it connected the bioethical principles to human rights as well. And in this document, which was published in the year 2005, and we're honored to be a part of the International Bioethics Committee and Intergovernmental Bioethics Committee, which developed this document, included indeed 15 ethical principles in replacement of the 4 previous ethical principles, including the human dignity and human rights, benefit and harm, autonomy and individual responsibility, consent, persons without capacity to consent, and these are the minors and those who are not capable of giving their own consent, and respect for the human vulnerability and personal integrity, as well as privacy and confidentiality, equality, justice, both distributive justice and corrective justice, and equity, non-discrimination and non-stigmatization, and respect for cultural diversity and pluralism. And this is extremely important because ethical principles might differ in one society from another society, particularly in human reproduction. In addition to this, there was also the principle of solidarity and cooperation, whether at the level of the nations or at the global level, and the social responsibility and the sharing benefits, the protection of the future generation. So this document thought as well of the future generation, not only the existing generations when we are talking about bioethics, and also it included the item which drew a lot of attention over the past years, and that is protection of environment, the biosphere, and biodiversity. So we can see here that the ethical principles have been expanded tremendously in order to cope with the development in science. Now, does this universal principle of bioethics have rooting in Islam? Indeed, yes, they do have rootings in Islam. Because if we look in the sources of information and regulation in Islam, they come from the primary sources of Sharia, and these are the Holy Quran, which is the very words of God, and the authentic hadith of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and Ijma', which is the unanimous opinion of Islamic scholars, and analogy or qiyas, by drawing a ruling on events by comparing with similar events previously ruled upon. Now, if something is not mentioned in the primary sources of Sharia, then a good Muslim would resort to secondary sources of Sharia. And these secondary sources of Sharia are istihsan, which is the choice of the better of the two options, and the views of the Prophet companion, the current local customs, if lawful, the public welfare. And the public welfare takes precedence over the personal welfare. In other words, one has to respect the welfare of the society as well as his own welfare and the ruling of previous divine religion. So this is the chronological order of driving bioethical rules in Islam. And bearing in mind that the purposes of Islamic law and Islamic Sharia, that's protection of faith, which is deen, protection of life, which is nafs, protection of lineage, which is the nasl, the future generation, and protection of intellect, aql, and protection of money or al-mal. So when we look at the 15 principles which are mentioned in the Universal Declaration of Bioethics and Human Rights of the UNESCO, in fact, they are included in the primary sources of Sharia, as well as in the secondary sources of Sharia, as had been seen by one of our very early publication in the 1994 in Healthcare Ethics by Rangilon. Now, the broad principles of Islamic jurisprudence are the basic nature of actions is their permissibility unless prohibited by a text, that is the so-called ibaha, and no harm and no harassment, and necessity permits the prohibited. So even if an action is prohibited, but it becomes necessary, then it is permitted. And the choice of the lesser harm. If two options are there, and one of them is more harmful than the other, then one has to choose the lesser harm option. Now, Sharia can accommodate different honest opinion as long as they do not conflict with the spirit of its primary sources and are directed to the benefit of humanity. And this is extremely important because Sharia is very flexible and it can accommodate new technologies, provided that it is for the benefit of humanity and does not contradict with its primary sources. Now, we all know that medical ethics are based on the moral, religious, cultural, philosophical ideas and principles of the society in which they are practiced. It is therefore not surprising to find what is ethical in human reproduction in one society might not be ethical in another society, despite the claim of the universality of the ethical principle. And that's why one of the principles of the Bioethics Declaration of the UNESCO, that respect for the universality and pluralism. So there is no one suit which fits for all. Now, let us look at Islamic perspectives in human reproductive technology. First, of course, the safe motherhood. Islam indeed has valued motherhood, as pregnancy and birth are responsible for the continuation of the human species on earth, which is one of the purposes of Islamic Sharia, as we mentioned, the preservation of nafs and the future generation. And therefore, provision of ethically acceptable reproductive health service to women should take into consideration ethical obligations, not only towards the mother, but towards the mother, the embryo, and the fetal patients as pregnancy develops on. The Holy Quran indicated that no mother shall be threatened on account of her child. لا تضر والدة بولدها ولا مولود له بولده. Also, the Holy Quran indicated that we have commanded unto man towards parent, his mother bear him in weakness upon weakness, and feeding him for 2 years. And in this way, we can see that the Holy Quran had called for the breastfeeding of the child for a couple of years. So when you apply this to contraception, though review of the Quran showed no text prohibiting spacing or prevention of pregnancy. However, there are traditions of the Prophet and the Quran as well, which allowed permissibility of contraception, as was indicated in the Holy Quran concerning breastfeeding, which is one method of contraception. Furthermore, coitus interruptus as well was being practiced by some companion of the Prophet Muhammad, while the Quran was revealed to the Prophet, and the Quran did not forbid the use of coitus interruptus for the companion of the Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him. So, as we mentioned, the rules of analogy in Islamic Sharia, by analogy, temporary method of contraception available today as oral contraceptive pills, intrauterine device, injectable implants, diaphragm, and others. All these methods of contraception are permitted because they are temporary methods of contraception, and by analogy, they are similar to coitus interruptus or breastfeeding. And Muslim scholars and fuqaha had agreed that women have the right to be informed, consent, and have access to safe, effective, and affordable and acceptable methods of fertility regulation of their choice. And this is extremely important because Islamic scholars have indicated that the contraception can be used for health reasons, for the prevention of repeated pregnancy and too close pregnancy or too late pregnancy or too early pregnancy, for health reasons, for economic reasons, if the income of the family is not enough to have so many children, and even for preservation of the beauty of the woman to enjoy a happy marital life with her husband. Now, when we look into the other side of the coin of human reproduction, and that is infertility and the most recent line of treatment of infertility, and that is assisted reproductive technology. In the early days of assisted reproductive technology, indeed, when we started it in the year 1986, patients and the society as well as the medical body rejected assisted reproductive technology on the basis of the fact that by doing assisted reproductive technology, test tube babies, we are handling the human embryos in the laboratory, and we are challenging the God's will by trying to make the barren woman fertile. And we used to be told that why should you perform assisted reproductive technology for a couple who are infertile? God wanted them to be infertile, so leave them alone. But they forget that even if you perform assisted reproductive technology to this couple who are infertile, you can never guarantee that they will get pregnant and they will have a child. So still, you know, the will of God is there, but for every disease, there is a remedy, as was mentioned in the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad. And indeed, it was very helpful in the world that Islamic institutes worked very hard to support access to reproductive technology and find the right balance between the reproductive freedom, religious, ethical, culture, and social limitations. So it added lots of regulation to utilize this modern technology. And the important guidelines which were published by many of the religious bodies, including Fatwa from Al-Azhar in the year 1980. And in fact, this fatwa was the basis for the start of assisted reproductive technology, not only in Egypt, but all over the Muslim world. And then the Islamic Organization of Medical Science in Kuwait in the year 1984. And then the Islamic Fiqh Council in the year 1984, and then the modification of the fatwa of the Islamic Fiqh Council in the year 1985, and then the first IVF based on these fatwas. We started assisted reproductive technology in the Muslim world, including Egypt and Saudi Arabia, and we had the first child born as a result of IVF in the year 1987. And the first child was born in Saudi Arabia as well at the same time. And then the first child was born in Iran on the 29th of December 1990. And had it not been the guidelines issued by these prestigious faith-based organization, we would not have been able to introduce assisted reproductive technology in the Muslim world. And then, of course, later on, there were lots of activities, including the Qatar University on the ethical impact of genetic research, the Islamic Organization of the Islamic Organization of Medical Science Culture, the Islamic Organization of Medical Science, the Islamic Organization of Science, Education and Culture in Rabat, the United Arab Emirates Conference on Healthcare Ethics in the year 2002, the IOMS 2007, and Dar el-Ifta recently in the year 2019. And of course, several publications on these issues from the International Islamic Center for Population Studies and Research at Al-Azhar University since 1991 till today. Now, what these bodies indicated, these bodies and organizations issued guidelines which were adopted by the medical councils, Ministry of Public Health in different countries, and indeed these guidelines control the practice of assisted reproductive technology in these countries. And of course, we have to remember that sexual reproductive health and reproductive rights of women, including contraception and assisted reproductive technology, are essential components of human rights, and they should never be transferred or denounced based on race, religion, national origin, political opinion, or economic conditions. Now, this organization highlighted that the primary sources of Sharia encouraged marriage, family formation, and procreation, because this is based in the primary sources of Sharia, as we mentioned earlier, on preservation of self and progeny. As mentioned in the Holy Quran, he creates what he wills, bestows upon him who will, bestows male or female, or make them barren. The art was not mentioned in the primary sources of Sharia. However, procreation within the frame of marriage was encouraged, as it preserved humankind, which is one of the 5 objectives of Sharia. And consequently, the attitudes of the patient and the society changed from rejection, feeling of shame, guilt, or secrecy when we started IVF first in Egypt or in Saudi Arabia, to openly seeking assisted reproductive technology in the 90s, because Muslims were reassured that the application of assisted reproductive technology is not against the religion, is not against the ethical principles based on the religious basis. And the basic guidelines for assisted reproductive technology is that if ART is indicated in a husband and wife as a necessary line of treatment of infertility, it is permitted and even encouraged, as it preserves the humankind. And of course, we have to remember, we have the Sunni sectors and the Shia sector. And the Sunni guidelines, all fatwas agreed upon that no mixing of genes, no sperm donation, no egg donation, no embryo donation, and also surrogacy. There is some debate about it. Some religious scholars will accept it. Some other religious scholars would not accept it. However, the Shia guidelines, they are slightly different from the Sunni guidelines. And of course, this is based on the fatwa from Ayatollah Ali Khamenei in the year 1999, where sperm donation, egg donation, and surrogacy were allowed. However, later on, sperm donation was prohibited. So it is egg donation and embryo donation and surrogacy, but sperm donation is not permitted. And egg donation is permitted within a frame of temporary marriage. Thus, our brothers in Shia, they indicated that preservation of marriage was prioritized over the purity of lineage. Preservation of both is required for the Sunni Muslims. And Iran is probably the only Muslim countries which has legislation for embryo donation since the year 2003. In addition to the normal practice of assisted reproductive technology, there are other techniques being allowed, like selective fetal reduction, and this is done on the basis that by doing selective fetal reduction, reducing 3 or 4 pregnancy sacs, you are protecting the remaining embryos from loss, and also are decreasing the complication for the mother. So you are doing good for the mother, preventing harm, and preserving, trying to increase the chances of preservation of the life of the remaining fetuses. Pregnancy in the postmenopause, provided that you are using the eggs, the autologous eggs of the woman. Surrogacy, as I mentioned, there is some debate about it. Oocyte cryopreservation for medical indications, yes, it is being permitted and supported. For social indication as well, for preservation of fertility of women if they didn't have the chance of getting married at an early age, or if they are having some disease which would reduce the ovarian reserve and they make them vulnerable to loss of fertility as age advances with them. And of course, the reproductive transplantation, uterine transplantation, and autologous ovarian tissue transplantation. And this is done for oncology patients. If a patient is going to have cancer surgery or so, then you preserve the ovarian tissue before she is exposed to surgical treatment and irradiation or chemotherapy. And then you reimplant the ovaries in the same woman so that you preserve her fertility. Now, the contentious issue about embryo research, I think I should talk for a few minutes about this. Well, embryo research, because we do know that the development and respect of the embryo advances step by step with its morphological development and growth. The God mentioned that the embryo grows from a clot to a lump of flesh, then boned flesh, and finally a fully grown infant. So the development is in phases. Now the organ differentiation occurs in 42 days after fertilization, and ensoulment of the fetus occurs after 120 days from fertilization. The organ differentiation occurs in 42 days after fertilization. However, ensoulment of the fetus occurs after 120 days from fertilization. And some authorities consider ensoulment occurs as early as 42 days post fertilization. Now, we used to say that the respect of the embryo start after 42 days because after 42 days, the individuality of the embryo starts. And before that, the individuality is not there. But now this threshold of 40 days and upward from conception has been brought forward as early as 14 days since the time of fertilization, because it is at 14 days the embryological science had shown us that individuality of the embryo start at 14 days. That's to say, after 14 days, the embryo cannot divide. It cannot be more than it is at the 14 days. Before that, the embryo could be lost, the embryo could divide, and therefore individuality is not there. And therefore, the respect for the embryo should not be delayed as late as 42 days or 120 days, indeed up to 14 days only. And this was the proposition which was proposed by us for the Islamic Science and Education and Culture organization in Rabat in the year 2000. And this, in fact, this concept has been affirmed by scholars and researchers from the Muslim countries during the international seminar on dilemma in stem cell research, which was held in Cairo in the year 2007 and organized by the Islamic Organization of Medical Science, WHO, EMRO, and Al-Azhar. So the respect of the embryo as an individual start at 14 days after fertilization. What about this? Of course, concept has enabled us to do testing as well as research on embryos. Thus, embryo testing and research for preservation and treatment of diseases and for advancement of scientific knowledge and benefit of humanity is therefore allowed before 14 days post-fertilization, either on embryos for treatment of diseases or on surplus embryos for performing research for the benefit of humanity. But if you are performing research on these embryos, then it has to be donated embryos with the free informed consent of the couples who are the owner of the embryos. Otherwise, you cannot perform research on embryos. And of course, the embryos upon which you perform the research cannot be implanted inside the uterus of the woman because you don't know the implication of the procedures which you perform in it. So the testing of the embryos, as we all know, there are three types for pre-implantation genetic testing. The pre-implantation genetic testing for aneuploidy, and this is for the detection of diseases like Turner syndrome or Klinefelter syndrome, or pre-implantation genetic testing for monogenic diseases to look into genes which is responsible for disease like cystic fibrosis, or pre-implantation genetic testing for structural rearrangement, whether balanced or unbalanced, in order to improve the results of assisted reproductive technology and reduce the incidence of miscarriage. Science developed, and now we have the comprehensive chromosomal survey it becomes possible now to look into the 23 pairs of human chromosomes, and they can be screened by examining 5 to 10 cells from the day 5 or day 6 embryos, so that you can identify the abnormal number of embryos, you can identify the structural arrangement of the embryos, or you can identify missing embryos, and also you can perform looking into genes which may cause the disease. And the purpose of the comprehensive chromosomal survey is to analyze, select, and transfer to the mother only embryos who have appropriate number and structure of the chromosomes in order to increase the chances of their pregnancy. So this is for the benefit of the couple. And in 2007, single nucleotide polymorphism has been possible with a host of detection of traits like eye color, hair, various characteristics of the individuals. And it has been proposed that single gene testing combined with detection of nucleotide polymorphism for aneuploidy is a novel approach to optimize pregnancy outcome in infertile patients. So there are various tests which you can perform in order to improve the outcome of assisted reproductive technology. So what are the indications of PGT, pre-implantation genetic testing, either for chromosomal detection of chromosomal abnormalities as Down syndrome, Turner syndrome, Klinefelter syndrome, Fragile X syndrome, for sex selection, whether for social indication or medical indication, medical indication like hemophilia, Fragile X syndrome, cystic fibrosis, muscular dystrophy, single gene defect, as I mentioned, by detection of the mononucleotide, single gene defect with Mendelian pattern inheritance as sickle cell anemia, myotonic dystrophy, cystic fibrosis, HLA typing, BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes in order to detect those embryos who are liable to develop malignancy. And in addition to this, for improving the results of the IVF embryo, as I mentioned, by selecting the embryos which has the best chance of implanting, or recently, as proposed in some of the Western countries, polygenic risk scores of the embryos, or mitochondrial disease replacement or editing. And that's when the disease is in the mitochondria. So you take the nucleus of the good quality embryo, of the healthy embryo, and you implant it in the inanucleated cell of embryo who does not have the disease of the mitochondria. And that's the mitochondrial disease replacement, gene editing, and the so-called CRISPR baby. But we have to remember that there are limitations for procedures. There are limitations for the procedures by which we analyze these chromosomes or look into genes. First of all, does the biopsy harm the embryo or not? It has been shown that it harms embryo in about 1% of the cases. But also it has been shown that every embryo has abnormal cells. So you may analyze one cell and you say it is abnormal, but the rest of the embryo is normal. Mosaic embryos, they have the chance of correcting themselves. Even if you find it abnormal, the embryo might correct itself. So by discarding these embryos, you are discarding healthy embryos. Embryos, it has been shown also that embryos with less than 20% abnormal cells can survive, and it is only embryos with more than 80% abnormal cells that cannot survive. But of course, you are not able to analyze 80% of the cells of the embryo. So there are limitations. In spite of the development of the science, there are limitations. And this has to be clearly explained to the couple. So the Islamic perspective on all this technology, Islamic perspective and ethics ensure that genetic testing in general should be applied in a way that utilizes it to alleviate the human suffering of the parents, the suffering of the future child in a responsible manner, and not looking for traits that one would desire in embryos. In other words, we should not use it for selection of embryos with certain characters, but we use it for selection of healthy embryos so that we have a healthy child after this, but not a child with a special color of the eye, or special color of the hair, or special eye lens, or special abilities muscular abilities to be an athlete or so. You choose it for the selection of couples who do not have disease, for the selection of embryos which would produce a healthy child. What about sex selection? Because this has been a big debate. Well, more than 20 years ago, sex selection was discussed in great details all over the world. And Professor Mahmoud Fathallah, our great professor, had indicated, at this time, the year 2000, that sex selection technologies for non-medical reasons have been applied, and that they should not be used on the female because using it on the embryo to choose the male embryo and not the female embryo is prejudice against the female child, and it should not be applied. And because this is a contingent issue, actually, which had been discussed in great depth, so we held a combined meeting at FIGO when I was chair of the FIGO Ethics Committee, combined meeting of FIGO Ethics Committee with the Women's Sex and Reproductive Rights Committee. And in that meeting, we invited Professor Mahmoud Fathallah, and we discussed this issue at length. And we came to the conclusion that to avoid discrimination against the female child, sex selection for non-medical indication should not be performed for selection of the sex of the first child of the family, or for families who have children of both sexes, or for selection of one sex only, whether male or female. So it should not be used for selection of the sex of the first baby, should not be used for selection of the sex in families who have children of both sexes, no matter what is the number of the boys and what is the number of girls, and it should not be used for selection of one type of sex only. And that's the consensus of opinion which we came to. And this is because if you don't allow choice of the sex of the child in some of these patients, either the woman would go on to have repeated pregnancy in order to get the male or the female child, which she and her husband wants, or her husband might go and marry another woman in order to get the sex of the other child from the other woman, whether a boy or a girl, or he might divorce her. So by doing sex selection, you are protecting the woman from the risk of repeated pregnancies with its complication, and also you are protecting the continuation of the family and the social well-being of the family. So from Islamic perspective, healthcare providers should properly counsel their patients in societies where sex selection is allowed to ensure that the procedure does not contribute to social discrimination based on sex or gender of the child, and is performed for the protection of the interest of the mother and the family in some societies where it is allowed. Now, recently there has been a lot of talks about polygenic risk scores. Some are the clinics in the United States advocated for the polygenic risk scores, and these are adds-on treatment in order to choose embryos of certain characters. And this indeed had been condemned even in the Western world, because, like designer baby, you are wanting a child with such and such characters, etc. This had been condemned in the Western world and also certainly in Islamic world. A few words about human genome editing. We do know that there are somatic cell gene editing, which affect only one person concerned and does not affect the future generation, and the germline cell editing, which passes on to the future generation. The gene therapy is performed by introducing genetically a modified version of a virus, the so-called viral vector, to the genetic material that will modify a disease-carrying gene into non-disease version of the gene. To ensure safety and biosecurity, laboratories' biosafety measures should be sufficient to avoid risk and misuse of the technology. The Islamic perspectives on these issues, that gene therapy might be legitimate and ethical, not to promote advantage or privilege, but to redeem genetically or otherwise physiologically inherited disadvantage as somatic human genome editing for Huntington disease. In other words, we use gene editing for curing disease, for prevention of disease, but not for certain for development of certain characters which we would like to have. The focus on a therapeutic application of gene editing would exclude purely cosmetic goals of enhancement of certain characters, but for prevention of pathological conditions. Recently, there have been some talks about the powerful gene editing method as regularly interspaced short palindromic, the so-called CRISPR, which resulted in the birth of 2 children, identical twin, the first baby is born via CRISPR. In this case, the husband had HIV, and the researcher did gene editing on the embryos in the lab to get rid of the HIV virus, and that is germline editing. This, of course, procedure had been condemned as unethical, because in this case, you could have prevented the disease through doing sperm washing or through doing IVF, and you did not need to perform the CRISPR procedure. And of course, this had been condemned by ethics, and certainly it is not being permitted in the Islamic societies, because the health of the babies, the success of editing or gene surgery, it is called gene surgery itself, has not been scientifically validated and reviewed, and is not ethically acceptable for the Muslims. So when we say that if you are going to apply gene editing, particularly somatic gene editing, in the Muslim society, it is accepted. There must be openness and transparency, explaining all the implications, balancing the potential harms and potential benefits, that you are applying it to conditions for which somatic gene editing is the only option available, and we need to consider the long-term implication of the procedure. So, Mr. Chairman, if I may conclude, after going through the modern technology in reproductive medicine, including family planning as well as assisted reproductive technology, one can say that Islamic ethical principles of justice, equality, and equity, and respect for the human vulnerability and diversity, and protection of and respect of the diversity and protection of future generation dictate that assisted reproductive technology should be made available, affordable, and accessible to all those who need it, to help them to have a healthy, full-term baby with minimal health risks for the mother and child. And we have to use every technology we have in order to be able to contribute to the development of a healthy child with a healthy mother. So any technology, the risks and benefit should be balanced before we can apply the technology. Given the vulnerability of human nature, the task is to work with authorities and religious bodies to regulate new practices without the intervention of the criminal law, because we cannot leave a reproductive medicine physician doing whatever they like to do, or let the patients choose whatever they like to do. It has to be regulated through a faith-based organization with the authorities in order to drive the guidelines. The problem of introducing the criminal law, then it will take a long time to modify or to change the law, which will be a hindrance for the scientific development and development of research. The goal, of course, of regulation must be to ensure secure maximum freedom of research of researcher, which is compatible with the interests of the patient, the religious perspective, and the good values of the society in which they live. So we cannot leave everything for whatever researcher would like to do. It has to be for the benefit of the couple and in line with the religious regulation of the issue. Genetic counseling for various individuals, infertile patient is very complex and it needs specific skills which are hardly included in the standard courses of graduate school or postgraduate training courses. And counseling should include not only the reproductive medicine physician, but also geneticists, the reproductive medicine specialist, bioethicist, psychiatrist, religious leader, in order to ensure that the procedure does not violate Islamic principles. And of course, we can work very closely with religious bodies in order to ensure guidelines on every new development in this field in order to allow the development of the research without violation of the human dignity and human rights. It is mandatory for the practicing physicians also to be aware of the culture and the religious background of their patients when they provide them with their medical advice, because we live in a small world and it is not unlikely that physicians will be dealing with patients who have different cultural, religious perspectives, and we should respect this diversity in various ethical issues in reproductive medicine. Thank you very much, and I'll be very happy to answer any question. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure listening to Professor Jamal Surur, who is also the chair of the East Mediterranean Research Ethics Review Committee, which Professor Ahmed Jafari actually sits on, which actually regulates and reviews WHO-funded research in the East Mediterranean region. Professor Jamal Surur also referred to Professor Mahmoud Fathallah. Professor Fathallah is professor of OBGYN in SIUT University, Egypt, but he was the chair of the global and regional advisory committees on health research for many years. And he also worked with the Human Reproductive Program in WHO for many years, but he's also retired now as we speak. Professor Surur reflected on two revolutions of the reproductive technology. He actually reflected on the need for expansion of the ethical principles, which we know of since the 1970s, and referred to the Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights of UNESCO to include consent, vulnerability, cultural diversity, solidarity, biodiversity, privacy, and confidentiality. And he also referred to the primary and secondary sources of fiqh in Islam, the primary sources being the Holy Quran, Hadith, Ijma' and analogy, but the secondary include istihsan, prophets, companions, current customs, public welfare, and so on. He also referred to the principles of Islamic jurisprudence and ethically accepted reproductive health services. He spoke in details about contraception and assisted reproductive technology from the scientific as well as the Islamic viewpoints. And he referred to the differences between the Sunni and the Shia sects as far as the assisted reproductive technology, when both sects agree on no mixing of genes, sperm donation and embryo donation, but it seems like egg donation is permissible in Shia sect. He also referred to the Quranic and Hadith related to human reproduction and gave a comprehensive account about the modern surveys, including the comprehensive chromosomal survey to optimize pregnancy outcomes among infertile couples. He also referred to the limitations of the ART and the Islamic perspectives which have to be applied in a responsible manner and not looking for traits that one would like to desire to see in embryos. He referred to the human gene editing, gene therapy, as well as germline editing, which is actually condemned and unethical. And finally concluded by the fact that from an Islamic perspective, we should always respect justice, equity, equality, respect for human vulnerability, and protection of future generations, and having the fact that we have to discuss with couples at large, keeping Islamic perspectives in account. So we really have to thank Professor Jamal Surur, and I have seen a lot of questions in the chat for him, and I assume that these will be handled during the afternoon session, which will be led by Professor Farhat Moazam. Professor Jafari, back to you to tell us about what happens with respect to the break, which we have only 4 minutes now instead of 15. So I turn back to you for advice in this respect. Thank you very much from my side.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mandil. So we can have perhaps an abbreviated break of 7 minutes, and coming back again to the venue, the physical participants as well as the virtual ones. So we'll see you in 7 minutes. Thank you very much. Welcome back, participants and panelists. So people are getting tea over here. You see, that's the advantage of being here physically, so you can have your cookies and tea while participating, whereas the virtual people will have to have their virtual tea, which we cannot serve. So Dr. Mandil, over to you.
Thanks very much, Professor Jafari. We now move to our first session in this webinar, and it is about ART in the EMR, Artificial Reproductive Technology in the region. During this session, we will have 3 speakers and a panel discussion. The first speaker is Dr. Sadia Pal. The second is Dr. Sagar Salehpour. And the third one is going to be a joint presentation by Dr. Khali Arawi and Dr. Hazar Haider. So the first speaker is Professor Sadia Ahsan Pal, who is the director of the Concept Fertility Center and New Beginnings Healthcare in Karachi. She's also the chair of the Maternal and Fetal Health Committee of the Southeast Asian Federation of OBGYN, the chair of the academic board and ex-vice president of the Society of Obstetricians and Gynecologists in Pakistan, member of the editorial board of the Journal of Pakistan Medical Association, vice president of the Association of Mothers and Newborn, member of the National Committee for Maternal and Neonatal Health in Pakistan, and a member of the Society of Laparoscopic Surgeons of Pakistan. She's a consultant, OBGYN, and fertility specialist by training, a medical doctor at the Concept Fertility Center in Karachi, and she's also a member of the board, as I said, of the Journal of the Pakistan Medical Association. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to welcome Professor Sadia Ahsan Pal to talk about the status and experience of ART in Pakistan. Professor Sadia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Mandil. And it's a tough act to follow with such huge names as yourself and Professor Sarur. Nevertheless, he's made my task a lot easier, so I don't have to go into the details of the religion, in detail. Anyway, so I'd like to start by reminding people that the WHO also recommends and emphasizes that we accelerate the progress in sexual and reproductive health rights. And sexual rights are human rights. And previously, infertility and treatment of subfertile couples was generally considered a luxury, but now it is also considered a human right. And as we emphasize on contraception and family planning, at the same time, couples who wish to have babies and are unable to conceive should be also helped. And there are many issues which come into this, as you can see. So, as we know, ART is assisted reproductive technology in which there is in vitro handling of both eggs and sperms and embryos to establish a pregnancy. Now, the definition of subfertility or infertility, often interchangeable terms, is inability to conceive after 12 months of unprotected intercourse, usually. And we take 6 months as a cutoff if the woman or the man is also older, after 35 years. But in Pakistan, we have a lot of cultural differences. I'm not sure about Muslim countries, but certainly different from Western countries and cultures. And we often see couples presenting within 1 or even 3 months of marriage if they haven't conceived. And they get worried, and people start talking, and they come to doctors for treatment, investigation, and even go straight to IVF. So, and there is also stress on marriage. If a woman is unable to have a baby in our culture, she's not really considered a woman, and this can end up in a breakdown of the marriage. And of course, as you know, in like most Muslim countries, polygamy is legal in Pakistan.
So at a time, a man can have 4 wives. So it's very easy, and women who are not able to conceive are very easily replaceable. And men move on to other women, even if the fault lies with the man. And there is a culture of alternative therapy, homeopathy, and visiting shrines, Sufi shrines, and other, things like that, places like that, where it is believed that prayer and other things can help the couple conceive by some miracle. Early age marriage is very common, even though there is a Child Marriage Restraint Act in at least 2 of the 4 provinces, but still not implemented. So, and forced marriage is also an issue. Later marriages are also becoming more frequent in Pakistan, especially amongst professional women. And this is leading to decreased ovarian reserve and increasing requests for ovum cryopreservation from single women, both for social and for oncofertility preservation prior to surgery or chemotherapy. So as I mentioned, there are many social issues related to marriage and subfertility, choice of spouse, even though Islam very much encourages a marriage of choice. However, most of it's not well understood and known, primarily because the Quran is in Arabic, and we are a bilingual nation in Pakistan. We speak Urdu and English, and most of us do not understand Arabic. So this norm of forced marriages exists, and sometimes the couple have never seen each other before marriage. There's no formal sex education, no formal parenting education. Cousin marriages of convenience happen, and there's a denial that the male is responsible for infertility or gender determination. The wife is mainly held responsible. And husbands commonly refuse to give a semen sample, hence delaying treatment. And it's easier to divorce one wife and move on to another one, or have another one and a third one and still have no children. And another cause for infertility commonly encountered is if the husbands are working abroad and the wife is here, so it's very unlikely for pregnancy to happen. As causes of infertility, these are I can only share the breakups from my own center. And male factors account for 56% of our patients, while just female factors account for 19%, and a combination male and female 10%, while 15% are unexplained. So as you can see, the majority of cases that are coming to an IVF center, like where I work in Pakistan, when we work up these couples, the majority cases, the problem lies with the husband. There are many ethical issues in ART, which have been highlighted in the previous presentation. It questions the deepest morality and autonomy, and providers should recognize and respect different points of views. So it's not just what we think or what one religion thinks. We should take all into consideration. And when we don't have guidelines, like we don't have guidelines for everything under the sun, and infertility and human reproduction, where the word sex comes in, is a big issue in Pakistan. And I'm very happy that this issue was raised in the previous presentation, where it was highlighted that criminal law should be kept away from it. And, that really doesn't help in our, at least scientific discourse. So we do seek, we do get answers from other organizations like the American Society of Reproductive Medicine, ASHRAE and HIFA, and of course, edicts from and judgments from Al-Azhar University have been a great source for many of our issues in Pakistan. So many aspects of the ethical, ART ethical issues are have been discussed earlier, and only the ones highlighted in green are being done in Pakistan. So we do not use posthumous gametes, surrogacy not allowed, donor conception not allowed, embryo research. Although I'm very pleased to know that it is allowed in according to Islamic principles, and that's very encouraging. However, it's not being done in Pakistan, and cloning, of course, is not allowed. Preconception genetic testing of parents, yes, that can be done here in Pakistan, although it's limited and very expensive. Sex selection versus family balancing, now there's a lot of debate there, but it is allowed in Pakistan. Sex selection, meaning as a part of pre-implantation diagnosis. So before implanting an embryo, you can determine the gender of that fetus, that embryo, if the couple wants that. So excess embryos, again, they are usually discarded in most IVF centers, I think in all, because we're not allowed to store them without the parent's consent. If the parent wants to keep them frozen for as long as they like, but it's all private, it's funded by themselves, they have to pay a fee, then they can keep it as long as they're keeping the fee. So the ART guidelines used by professional organizations, international ones, are used to set standards, primarily are intended for ART clinicians, nurses, embryologists, counselors, and administrators, researchers, human research ethics committees, and governments. But who will give the guidelines? We have an IVF Society of Pakistan, which was founded by Professor Rashid Latif Khan. We are trying to revive it. He himself is involved, but the last 2 years of COVID have really delayed things. And a group of individuals and IVF consultants are working on it. We have limited experience sharing at conferences by the various IVF centers. IVF challenging the norm, I mean, these things are just not applicable in Pakistan, the genetic mother, gestational mother, so we don't need to go into that. It can only be the biological mother whose egg has been used. So the concept of donation does not exist or is not allowed in Pakistan. Ethical dilemmas, who should have treatment? I mean, sometimes you feel that the doctor who is dealing with, or the IVF consultant is like playing God. And this couple sitting in front of you, requesting you, begging you, and here you are telling them, no, you're not suitable, or I cannot do this. It's a very, it's very upsetting, even for the doctor, especially when you're turning them down for something that they're requesting. So there's a high cost involved and a low success rate. Most people don't realize that even in the best IVF centers, when you're using a non-donor egg and sperm, the results are generally, between 30-35% at the most. Some may be better, but generally this is the average. And who's going to bear the cost when such low success rate is there? It is the couple themselves, and the government doesn't, although in some countries, some IVF cycles are, the government bears the cost. However, in Pakistan, there are reports of 1 or 2 IVF centers being or IVF treatment being offered at a government hospital in Lahore and Karachi, but in reality, it's not really, I think, right up to intrauterine insemination and not really IVF. So pre-implantation genetic diagnosis is being done, and spare embryos can be frozen or discarded as per couple's choice. This is being done at every IVF center, so in Pakistan. So, and it is by choice of the parents. So age is not really a barrier. It's really the money that is a barrier. But genuinely, most IVF centers in Pakistan would discourage women over 40 and, of course, under 18. The relationship status, I mean, it can only be in a marriage. And childless couples versus partners who have children from other relationships. So polygamy is common, and this does create problems. Are criminals eligible for IVF treatment? And then there's this other ethical issue. Referral for guardianship as adoption is not legal in Pakistan. You can only be a guardian. And most Muslims don't know this. Again, you know, because we're Muslims in name, we're born Muslims, but we haven't really made a choice, you know, or read enough about it, I guess. So this is not applicable in Pakistan. Storage and transfer of embryos, how many to be transplanted? Now, this is in Pakistan, we can say whatever, you know, like we say single embryo is best, especially if you're under 40 years of age or below 35. But couples request, we love twins. We would love to have triplets. And they think they are saving money. You know, by having in one cycle cost, they can have multiple babies. For an infertile couple, that is really, really nice, but it's really a nightmare when you consider the cost of looking after a twin pregnancy, the complications, and likely need for an intensive care for the baby, neonatal intensive care, which is very, very expensive in Pakistan, as is the rest of the world. So, however, we do advise. Whether they follow our advice is not all the time, but we do limit to 2 embryos usually, most IVF centers at the most. And our aim is to go for single embryo transfer. How long will the embryos remain frozen? Again, there are centers who have frozen embryos for over 10 years on couples' request. And I've personally recently delivered, you know, during COVID, the last 2 years, we did a lot of frozen embryo transfers. They actually have better results, better live birth outcomes as compared to a fresh cycle. This is because suddenly people woke up, oh, we have a frozen embryo in the, you know, in that IVF center. They'd forgotten. And they decided to have it transferred. And we'd also cut down most IVF centers all over the world following COVID guidelines. They had cut down on the fresh cycles for safety reasons to reduce the risk of getting COVID for the staff and everything else. But frozen embryos were being done, and treatment of older couples were being done because they don't really have much time. So, because frozen embryos have better results. So we've delivered embryos frozen for over 10 years, even in Pakistan, and with very good outcome, normal baby, healthy, everything good. Questions about what will happen if the marriage ends in a divorce or the relationship ends. So there's additional cost of freezing. I already discussed this, who should pay for it, private IVF generally in Pakistan, And again, I think this is an ethical question. Who are we to decide? There are people who are too poor to afford an IVF. So IVF, okay, I've had people we've given discount to and waived off our fee and everything. And when they get pregnant, they can't afford to have a baby in a private hospital. Then they want to go to, a government hospital where there may be no NICU services available. And the government hospital neonatal intensive care services are really, really stressed in Pakistan. So again, should we be doing this? Should they be doing this? I think you need a reality check here. So the pre-implantation genetic diagnosis is allowed. And surprisingly enough, in Pakistan, sex selection for family balancing is allowed. So this is something which a lot of doctors would not agree with, including myself when I started, when I was like 10 years down the line in my career in vitro fertilization. I was inducted into it by a very, very highly respected doctor in Pakistan, Dr. Faridun Setna. And I wasn't interested in IVF at all. I was more into family planning, contraception, because that's a huge problem for Pakistan. However, when the legislation came for sex selection being allowed, our center, like all other centers, is offering this service. However, I didn't feel, right doing it. But then he counseled me, and he said, I myself do values clarification and behavior change trainings in sexual and reproductive health topics, and which includes abortion as well. And he said, is it right? Do you feel good that this woman is having like 9 daughters and she's continuing to have more and more babies? And every time it's a girl. If you can help her have that male boy, and they need this male boy for inheritance. And this is a huge issue, which I wasn't aware of in our society, but dealing with these couples, they're desperate for the sake of, they have these big lands and they're agriculturalists or whatever, and they're not secure unless they have a male child. So that kind of convinced me. I said, yes, well, you have a point there, and who am I to decide? So anyway, there are 2 ways of looking at everything. That's how I feel. And we can't be rigid about it, and we need to listen to the alternative point of view. I was very pleased to see that Islamic research, thinkers and researchers and clerics agree to stem cell research with spare embryos with the consent of the parents. So this is a good thing. And on the other hand, we also forget that in Pakistan, we are a majority Sunni nation. However, we have a big Shia population as well, and we have other religions too, including Christians, Hindus, Parsis, and many others, and atheists as well. So we cannot impose our, Sunni values or Sunni Islamic laws onto other religions. So if they believe in something and it's allowed in their religion, then we need to consider it. So as the history was given, that, the first IVF baby was born, and very soon we had the fatwa from Al-Azhar University in 1980. And this was followed just 2 years after the first IVF baby was born in England. The first IVF in Pakistan baby was born in 1984 by by the team, Professor Rashid Latif Khan and his team, and the Pakistani ulema also agreed with the fatwa given by Al-Azhar. Now over 15 IVF centers are present in Pakistan. This law was revisited in the Federal Shariat Court in Pakistan due to a case of surrogacy filed in 2015, which went on till 2017. This was a doctor couple actually who used a surrogate mother, and after the baby was born, which happened to be a girl, the surrogate mother refused to hand over the baby. And so they were obviously upset, and this came to light. And then the judgment took 2 years, and they said that development of babies can be carried out in an external environment, IVF, but both the male and female used to conceive the baby will have to be married as per Islamic law. They cannot have test tube babies by getting support from a third party in the shape of a sperm or egg donation. If both partners are legitimately married to each other, then modern machines, medicine, and science can be used to make babies. So it has to be, and the surrogate mother is just not allowed. So the baby stayed with the surrogate mother. So further amendment, they went on to say that further amendment be made in the Pakistan Penal Code, suitable section of the law be added regarding definition of surrogacy, the same be declared as an offense punishable with imprisonment as well as fine. The couple who arranges a surrogate mother would be liable to punishment along with the surrogate and the doctor who conducts the surrogacy procedure. Punishment for the doctor who maintains the sperm bank or egg bank for using in future for donor insemination. Any doctor involved in the procedure of surrogacy shall lose his license. So the Council of Islamic Ideology allowed test tube babies under certain conditions. IVF is permissible as long as they are married, and surrogacy and donation not permissible. Gender selection is not prohibited in Islam. This is the Council of Islamic Ideology in continuation. Can be done within the limits of Sharia. It is not an innovation, and if done, it is an innovation, and if done within the parameters set by Islam, it is fine. The Council of Islamic Ideology is not against gender selection, but the move must be discouraged. The medical community was urged to think morally and ethically and not to make financial gains the sole prerogative. A Lahore-based IVF consultant said the most couples, even those who were not infertile, approached them for a male child. So there are concerns about the PGD and gender selection. While the concept of IVF is catching up, a lot of people have interest in gender selection for all the wrong reasons. Globally, PGD is used for screening and diagnosis of genetic diseases in early embryo prior to implantation and pregnancy, as well as finding out the gender. The purpose is cut down the chances of having a baby with genetic disorders by offering screening. So I just wanted to compare this, as I wanted to point out that we're not just a Sunni nation. And when we say Sunni, there are so many subsects of Sunni. There are over 77 sects in Islam. So everyone needs to know what they believe in and whom to go to. And this is what is advised when we are counseling. This is what we do when somebody asks us, is this okay? Is this allowed in Islam? And my answer, and most of my colleagues would say, you need to talk to your own cleric, the one you go to, your go-to person, and they need to advise you what is allowed. So we just learned as well, I won't repeat it, that the Shia sect is far more, let's say, liberal, and they are using ijtihad and aqal and using the muta marriage as a way out for these desperate people. And in fact, we actually refer our couples whom we are unable to help and who are desperate. We do refer them to countries like Iran, where they can go and get their treatment done legally and according to Islamic principles as well. On the other hand, I don't know how many of you are aware of this. One would have thought that the Jewish faith would be the most, let's say, conservative. However, they are the most liberal as far as ART is concerned. In Jewish halakhic law, male rabbis legislate on the appropriate use of IVF for their followers. Third-party donation, including sperm donation, is allowed since Jewishness is seen to be conferred through the mother's side, particularly through the act of gestating and birthing of the baby. The Jewish state is pro-natalist, like the Muslims as well as the Christians, with the state subsidizing up to 6 cycles of IVF, up to the birth of 2 children for any given Jewish patient. Rabbis are permissive when it comes to single career women as well as lesbian Jewish mothers conceiving children through ART. Most conservative rabbis prefer the non-Jewish donors. So to prevent adultery between a Jewish mother and a Jewish woman, Jewish man and a Jewish woman, and to prevent future genetic incest amongst the offspring of anonymous donors in this small intermarrying country. Debates have revolved around whether surrogacy should be allowed for infertile couples using single or married surrogates. Generally speaking, single Jewish women are preferred as surrogates, both to avoid the implications of adultery for married surrogate women and to confer Jewishness through a Jewish woman's gestation of the fetus. So embryo transfer, I already discussed with you about how many embryos to transfer. We do encourage a single embryo or at the most 2 embryo transfer. AISRM has its guidelines, and in Pakistan, we do tend to follow the ASRM as well as the HIFA guidelines. So in the end, I just want to leave you, I posed these 2 questions at a gynecologist meeting, and just asked them to think whether they agreed, strongly agreed, disagreed, or strongly disagreed with the following statements. Number 1, you can think about it and just decide what you think, what you want to answer it. Number 1, women with premature ovarian failure should go for ovum donation. And number 2, in a childless marriage, the wife should encourage her husband to marry a younger woman. So think about your answer. Okay. And now, tell me whether you agree, strongly agree, disagree, or strongly disagree. Number 1, if I had premature ovarian failure, I would go for ovum donation. Number 2, if in a childless marriage, I would encourage my husband to marry a younger woman. Yes, so I would be very surprised if your answers are the same for both these situations. When we're talking about someone else, our answer may be different to what we would apply to ourselves. So thank you very much. I will end there. Just some food for thought for everybody. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Professor Sadia Pal, for an excellent presentation reflecting on ART in Pakistan. Professor Sadia spoke about the social issues related to fertility and marriage in Pakistan. She also spoke about the causes of infertility being predominantly male-related, followed by female, followed by both. She reflected on ethical issues in ART and supporting criminal law to be kept away. She spoke about the different ART practices in Pakistan and related ethical dilemmas and who should receive ART. And she also mentioned that the egg and sperm donation are not applicable in Pakistan. She spoke about storage and transfer of embryos and the right to access IVF, the pre-implementation genetic diagnosis and spare embryos. She spoke about the gender selection and the concerns about PGD and GS, comparing the Shia with the Sunni sects in Islam, as well as the Jewish jurisprudence. So we are very thankful to Professor Sadia Pal. And now it's my pleasure to welcome the next speaker, who is Professor Saghar Salehpour from the Islamic Republic of Iran. Professor Salehpour is a professor of obstetrics and gynecology and medical director at the Shahid Beheshti University of Medical Sciences in Tehran. Her research interests are in obstetrics and gynecology, research and development, as well as medical education. It is my pleasure to welcome Professor Saghar Salehpour, who is going to reflect on the ART experiences from the Islamic Republic of Iran. Professor Salehpour, the floor is yours.
Hello, Dr. Mandil and all the college, and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to talk here about the ethical challenges in human reproduction and the status of my country, Iran. Thank you for this very nice presentation of previous speakers, and I will proceed to my talk. Would you please share my slides? Or I need to share them?
Just a minute, we'll share.
Yeah, we'll take care of it. Just give us a couple of minutes,
thank you very
Dr.
much.
Saghar. Yeah, thank you.
Please go ahead.
Yes. Okay, as you know, my main areas of work, treatment, research, and teaching is infertility in my country. And because I am a member of Iranian Society for Reproductive Medicine, I am a board member, I can give you some challenges that we have in Iran regarding to ART and special aspects of ART. It doesn't go.
Would you like us to change your slides for you if you
Please,
just
yes, because the net is not very good in here, and for changing the slide, I have difficulty. Okay, as everybody knows, infertility is 1 year of unprotected intercourse, regular intercourse without pregnancy. The prevalence of infertility in Iran, as we have done many studies, is about 12 to 15%. And the main causes of infertility in my country is male factor, ovulation problem, tubal problem due to infections or surgeries, decreased ovarian reserve that nowadays is a very big problem. And as previous speaker mentioned about it, we have a problem for solving the infertility with this kind of decreased ovarian reserve. Unexplained infertility, azoospermia, and premature ovarian failure. That is a big issue. Next slide, please. Okay, what are the risk factors here? I have heard that in Pakistan, the marriage is early, but nowadays in my country, we have many cases of late marriage. That is a big risk factor for infertility. Late childbearing. Sometimes, especially for the women, they want to be graduated and they are married, but because of graduation, because of studying, because of their hard work, they postpone childbearing, and it makes problem for fertility. Infectious disease. We don't have many tuberculosis like some country, but still there is tuberculosis, especially because we have many people coming from other country to other neighbor country to our country. Endometriosis is a very big issue in Iran now, and polycystic ovary. Our ethnical group is something different from European ethnical groups, and polycystic ovary is more prominent in our population. Next slide, please. Can I have next slide, please? Yes. The area of infertility treatment in Iran are induction ovulation, intrauterine insemination of husband's sperm, assisted reproduction technology, IVF and ICSI, and we have third party, gamete donation, embryo donation, and surrogacy. But I will tell you in next slides that we have many challenges about this third party pregnancy. But in other area is very easy, much more easier than other division of Islam like Sunni or other division. In Shia is much more easier. Next slide, please. First IVF baby in Iran was born in 1990 in Yazd. But now there is more than 120 IVF centers in the country. Some are related to the university and some are private. All IVF and infertility centers in Iran are under the guidelines of Ministry of Health and Medical Education. There is guidelines and everybody have to obey the guidelines. Next slide, please. Since 1979 in Iran, there is biomedical ethics about organ transplant, ART, abortion, and stem cell. You know, these are the area that there is many challenges, especially in religious country, for transplantation, for assisted reproduction technology, for abortion, especially which abortion is allowed. Abortion accorded to maternal sake is allowed, or sometimes other abortion are allowed. Abortion of abnormal babies like trisomy, like other abnormalities, are they allowed in Islamic rule or not? And stem cell, because stem cell is a new area that every part of medicine use nowadays stem cell, and especially in infertility treatment also, you know that we can use a stem cell for decreased ovarian reserve, for abnormal endometrium, teen endometrium, sometimes for Asherman disease. So we need to have biomedical rules and ethics about this kind of treatment. Next slide, please. Some of the ethics in Iran are according to Islamic Shia rules, means fatwa, and some are accorded to legislation. It's a mixture, but most of the rules that are now in Iran are Shia rules. Next slide, please. According to Iranians' law, any kind of infertility treatment must be unmarried couple, including ART. We have to do any kind of treatment, even third-party treatment, in married couple. We don't have any law for single parent or for unmarried couple, is according to Islamic law. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Can I have next slide, please? Okay. I don't want to talk about what are allowed, because we know that IVF is allowed, ICSI is allowed, intrauterine insemination with husband sperm is allowed, every kind of thing. Even in Iran, pre-gestational genetic diagnosis is completely allowed. Screening is allowed. A question mark just is about sex selection, that by the end of my talk, I will mention it. But we have some problem that I wanted to talk about this problem that everybody knows about the challenges, the problem that every country have. A problem with one of the problem that we have is with these third-party gametes. This is very important because the rule of Islam and especially Shia fatwa sometimes is different from other rules and ethics, and it's very difficult to match everything together. And now we have many question marks about these third-party gametes. Can I have next slide, please? Yes, about male gamete donation. One is not allowed in Iran. We don't have still a law of male gamete donation, sperm donation, I mean. One of the problem is the rule of Hifz al-Furuj, that I can translate it to that we can't have extramarital relationship. So this is an issue that prohibit to do male gamete donation. Another issue is the issue of nasab. I'm not, in Iran, the language is not Arabic like as Pakistan, but I am sure that all the audience who are Arab, they can understand the nasab. Nasab means when you do gamete donation, especially sperm donation or embryo donation, who will be the father? Where is the line of this nasab? Is the genetic father the father of the baby, or the biologic father is the father? And for this nasab, in the future, we will have problem for heritage and some problem for the baby that from whom he or she will have heritage if the baby lose the parent, the father, the biologic father. Is the genetic father who have to take about this baby or this child, or is the biologic father from who this child will have heritage? This is the problem that still is under question mark. And the fatwa, the Shia rule, said that nasab will go to genetic. It means that the genetic father, the sperm donor, will be the father of this child. And so it's not fair for the child that this biologic father, that he or she is born in their house and they are responsible for them. The father is responsible for the child. According to the Shia rule, he can't be the father. The nasab will not go to this biologic father. Another thing about male gamete donation is that we need a central registry, because for male gamete it's very easy to have many pregnancy and many siblings. So we need to have registry and a very strict epidemiology to prohibit all the consanguinity marriage in the future generation. This is very important. I think that is much more important than nasab or Hifz al-Furuj. If we don't have registration centrally and we don't know that how many pregnancy we will produce from one sperm and how many siblings we have from one sperm, we could have a disaster in the next generations. Next slide, please. About female gamete donation. Another issue in female gamete donation also is Hifz al-Furuj. But a way in Shia is that we have temporary marriage for men in Shia law. So these men could have temporary marriage with the donor egg, with the donor, and they could have this donation and zygote formation and pregnancy. But at the end, again, this is a question: who is the mother? Is the genetic or the biologic mother who carried this zygote and who carried this baby and give birth to this baby. And sometimes some of the Shia laws said that this baby will have two mothers.
Just a slight technical glitch over here. Just give us a second. Sorry about that.
Okay. I'm with you. I will continue and when...
Thank you.
Okay, sometimes the law said that this baby who is from from egg donation has two mothers. And still this is a difficulty. And we have to solve this kind of problem. Okay, another, can I have the next? Again, the main problem is again for central registry. We need to have central registry to make sure that how many child we have from this egg. Having child from the egg is not as easy as having child from sperm, because we need a cycle, we need a stimulation, we need a puncture of the oocyte, but still we could have many siblings from one mother, and we need to have central registration. Next slide, please. Okay. This next issue is surrogate uterus. Surrogate uterus is accepted in Shia. But again, there is a question in Shia law that who is the mother of the baby? Most of the Shia clergy say that the genetic is the egg donor is the mother. So the mother who is the donor of egg and who is the person who has the egg is the proper mother. And the surrogate is just the carrier. But some of the clergy say, no, this carrier also has a responsibility and she can be the mother, although a small chance of being a mother. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. No, but yes, we have many problems about third-party pregnancy, or sometimes we say third-parent pregnancy. One problem is the confidentiality of gamete donation. How much confidential could be this gamete donation? In Iran, they said that it should be completely confidential and nobody must know about it. But there is a problem that every children need to trace their genetic root. And this is a children's right to know about their genetic root. So this confidentiality could have an exception for the children who are from this egg or sperm or embryo donation. They must know their genetic root. Another problem in third-party pregnancy is absence of central registry in Iran. Nowadays, we don't have central registry. And I think that for any kind of donation, we need to have registry to be able to trace the genetic root and to be able to prohibit all the consanguinity marriage and sibling marriage. Another issue in Iran is that sometimes we are facing with selling gamete, and this is not accepted in law. In law, selling is forbidden, but sometimes in some center we can see selling gametes. Another problem is what to do when the originator of the gamete, either father or the mother, are died. What we can do with these gametes or with this embryo? What's the rule? Most of the Islamic rule says that if the father is died, is the grandfather who is responsible for this zygote. and it's not the mother who is responsible. And if the mother is died, again, father is responsible. But still is question mark that what to do with this death of the originator of the gamete. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yes. Iranian Embryo Donation Act is accepted in 2002 in Iranian Islamic Parliament. This is the only act that is completely accepted by the parliament. But still there are concerns about this act. One concern is again NASA, who is the father of this baby who is from embryo donation, from whom this baby will have, or this child will have heritage, rule of lineage. Again, central registry is needed to prevent marriage between siblings. We have the act, but still we don't have central registry. And another issue that is not seen in this act is about embryo banking. Are we allowed to do banking of embryo? And the next issue is using embryo from infertile couple. Can we use embryos from infertile couple that now they have one child or children from treatment and they don't need their zygote anymore? They can give this embryo to other people or not. This is some of the areas that are not seen in this Embryo Donation Act. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yes. And in Iran, what are the prerequisites for embryo donors? For every donors, we need to do a psychiatric consult because we don't want to expand all the psychiatric problems like schizophrenia, bipolarity, other problems to all the population. We need to do drug abuse check for the donor. They must be Iranian citizen if they want to give embryo to the Iranian people. Their embryo donor must be legally married. They will be checked for HIV and hepatitis, and they must not have criminal recourse. All the donors are screened for criminal recourse. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yes. And what, which are, no, previous slide, please, previous slide. Which are the prerequisites for embryo recipient? Again, we do psychiatric consult to make sure that they are competent, they are responsible. There must be all the aspects of competency and responsibility. They must not have serious illness. They must be Iranian citizen. And they will go to the court and take one letter from the court with a signature that this couple are eligible to be recipient for embryos. Next slide, please. Again, I have to emphasize that the most important area in ART and third party is registration and the ability to trace genetic roots. Next slide, please. Next, yes. There are some other issues in Iran that we have to think about it, and I ask all the speakers and all the audience to think about this issue. If sometimes we want to do egg donation, especially for Shia, that they are allowed to do egg donation. What is the age for the recipient that we say that this recipient is old? It means how old is too old for getting pregnant. For male, how old is too old, and for female. Because you know, when we do egg donation, we can get a pregnancy for every age of women. And what will happen for children right? For children that their right is to have alive mother and father, alive parents, and responsible parent, competent parent. If a lady after 55 years old get pregnant with donor egg, will she be eligible for responsibility of a child of 7 years, 10 years, 15 years when she's about 70 years old? This is the question mark that we have to think about it. Another question mark is sex selection. Other speaker says that in their country is allowed. In Iran, is not forbidden, but is it right to do sex selection, to do IVF for a couple that they don't have any problem giving this medication, this expense for the country, for the insurance, for the couples, and going to the operating theater, getting anesthesia, puncture of the eggs, perhaps getting ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, biopsy of an embryo. Everybody knows that nowadays biopsy of the embryo is under question mark, and sometimes even for aneuploidy, all the authorities says that we need to take some of the culture media to check for aneuploidy, and biopsy of the embryo is not very easy and is not very safe. So is it right to do sex selection and to do these procedures just for having most of the time in Iran also is like Pakistan and other Middle East countries, most of the time they want boy. Another question mark is about single parent ART. In Iran, we don't have the law, but we have to think about it, what we can do for single parent that they want, especially single women that they want to have children. Is it a right issue? Is it good for children right to having just one parent? These are the question mark, and I can say that still we don't have a strict law in Iran about this issue. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. And I think it's about just 20 minutes that I finished. Thank you very much, everybody, for hearing me.
Thanks very much, Professor Salehpour, for an excellent presentation. Basically, one of the good things about your slides was that there were more questions than answers, and it was actually very intellectually stimulating, which I found during your presentation. And obviously, this webinar, I think, would have been best through a panel discussion where everybody's around the table physically, rather than a hybrid webinar like the one we're having today. This is in my humble opinion. Also, your presentation has reflected how the Shia sect has become quite progressive as compared to the Sunni sect, whether we're talking about mega countries in the region like Egypt, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia, where the issues you have covered are very differently handled, and the jurisprudence is quite different. You actually spoke about risk factors for infertility and infertility treatment. You spoke about male gamete donation, female gamete donation, surrogate uterus, problems about third-party pregnancy, the Iran Embryo Donation Act, the prerequisites for the embryo donors and the embryo recipients. And you also ended with the presentation with issues about ART in Iran, including the age of the mother and the father, the child rights, the gender selection, and the single parent ART. I think we learned a lot, Professor Salehpour, from your presentation as far as ART in the Islamic Republic of Iran. And I think we now turn to the third presentation in this session, which comes from Lebanon. And in this session, I'd like to invite two speakers, Dr. Thalia Arawi and Dr. Hazar Haidar. So Dr. Thalia Arawi is the founding director of the Salim Al-Hoss Bioethics and Professionalism Program at the University of Beirut, the AUB, which is a collaborating center in bioethics, just like Karachi and Tehran. Professor Dr. Alawi is a clinical bioethicist, a clinical ethicist consultant, a certified healthcare mediator at the AUBMC. She's probably the first Arab member to be appointed at the board of the International Association of Bioethics. She has several publications and research interests, including clinical ethics, biomedical ethics, philosophy of medicine, humanitarian medicine, bioethics, mental health, and medical education. This is for Dr. Thali Arawi. Now, as far as Dr. Hazar Haider, she's an assistant professor at the ethics program of the University of Quebec at Rimouski in Canada. She completed her bachelor's degrees in biology, then studied genomics, and before she pursued her PhD in biomedical sciences at the Université de Montréal in Canada, where her research focused on prenatal testing with a comparative lens between Lebanon and Quebec. She actually had a postdoctoral fellowship jointly with the Institute of Health and Social Policy at McGill and the Research Ethics Center of University of Montreal. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's now my pleasure to introduce the two speakers from Lebanon, Dr. Thali Arawi and Dr. Hazar Haider, to speak about the experiences from Lebanon as far as ART is concerned. Dr. Hazar and Dr. Arawi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mandil. Sorry, I'll leave the floor to my colleague. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having us today to talk about assisted reproductive technologies in the Lebanese context. So, as we all know now, when we talk about assisted reproductive technology, we mean several types of medical procedures and which have one aim, which is pregnancy. So since the birth of Louise Brown in UK through IVF, the field of reproductive technology has been exponentially growing. And as we can see, as we saw with Dr. Surur presentation and the other presenters, we have many different types, such as ICSI, pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, egg and sperm donation, mitochondrial transfer, or what we know as pre-parent baby procedure, and more recently, polygenic embryo screening, which gives an estimate risk of the embryo, for instance, for having, I don't know, Alzheimer's disease in 30 years, and also physical traits such as educational attainment. It's a very controversial technique, but it's not the one that we will focus on, Talia and I. So today we chose to talk about and to discuss uterine transplantation in the Lebanese context. So uterus transplantation, we know it's a very complex procedure. It's a very expensive one. So to start with, what is the status quo in Lebanon regarding this procedure? Back in 2016, the Bellevue Medical Center had signed an agreement with the University of Gothenburg in Sweden to become among the first teams worldwide to perform the uterus transplantation. Therefore, Lebanon became the first country in the Middle East and North African region and among the only 10 countries in the world till now to perform the uterus transplantation. The first successful uterus transplantation was conducted by a team of doctors from Lebanon and Sweden in June 2018. And the recipient was a 24-year-old woman with what we know as Mayer-Rokitansky-Kuster-Hauser syndrome, which is a rare disorder and that affects women, is characterized by the failure of the uterus to develop properly in women who have normal ovarian function. And the donor was her mother, a 50-year-old woman. So this successful transplantation led to the first successful birth of a baby girl in the MENA region on January 13, 2020. And we know that for these women, motherhood choices spins usually around two options, either surrogacy or adoption. But in Lebanon, these options seem to be either challenging or absent because of many diverse reasons that we will explore through the cultural background, the sociocultural background of the Lebanese setting. So Lebanon is a small country in the Mediterranean with 18 recognized religious sects that are representative of Lebanon through diversity. And Lebanon major religions are Islam and Christianity. And within the Muslim community, the majority is divided equally between the Sunni and Shiite denominations, while Lebanese Christians represent 35% of the population and are divided into Maronite Catholic majority, Greek Orthodox, Greek Catholic, Protestant, and others. The legal system is based on a mixed system of Ottoman legal tradition, civil law based on the French Civil Code, and we have the religious laws governing the different sects. Further, we know that health policy in Lebanon is influenced by religious leaders, and any drafted ethical code in medicine, whether it's related to beginning of life issues, assisted reproductive technologies, or end of life issues, should be accepted and ratified by all the religious figures. Otherwise, the drafted code will not be approved and will not be ratified. So, in general, Lebanese citizens will look to their religious authorities, whether for Muslim or Christian communities, for guidance when considering major decisions in their life. So why uterine transplantations is an appealing option when compared to surrogacy or adoption. Adoption is not an assisted reproductive technology, but it's one of the choices for motherhood. So why it is an appealing option when compared to surrogacy or adoption? So this is explained by the religious positions on this matter in the Lebanese setting. In Islam, like many of you presented, Sunni authorities consider the procedure inadmissible by Sharia law. The reasoning behind this being the confusion as to who the real mother is, as well as the introduction of the husband's sperm into the surrogate in a child born out of wedlock. However, the Shiite scholars consider it admissible if the couple is married and infertile, and regard the embryo as different from the sperm, and as such, see no problem with the surrogacy procedure. However, with regards to Christianity, and specifically within the Greek Orthodox denomination, surrogacy is prohibited because it is considered to deprive three actors, the birth mother, the genetic parents, and the fetus, their prototypical role in the process. So it deprives the mother from a crucial role of motherhood and disrupts the bond between the surrogate and the fetus at birth, which is seen unjust toward all of these actors. Similarly, for Catholic denomination, surrogacy is prohibited because it's considered immoral in that it involves dissociation between the husband and the wife and an intrusion by a person other than the couple involved. So according to Catholic Church, surrogacy betrays the spouse's right to become a father and a mother only through each other. For adoption, as I said, it's not an assisted reproductive technology, but it's a choice offered to become a mother, a father. But the largest barrier to it being normalized within the Lebanese setting and the Middle East is the Islamic stance on the practice. So adoption is not permitted by Islamic law. Currently, only 5 Muslim majority countries in the world allow it, but Islam does recognize and encourages a communal obligation to provide for and protect homeless and parentless children. With regard to Christianity within the Lebanese setting, adoption is permitted and welcomed because it is seen as a child is considered as admitting a believer into the family of God. So, to wrap it up, in its current form, Lebanese law neither permits nor outlaws surrogacy outright. Further, we know that some anecdotal evidence show that surrogacy and other reproductive procedures such as egg donation, sperm donation are taking place, but in a very clandestine manner. So I'll leave now the floor to Talia to tell you more about the ethical, legal, and social perspective for uterine transplantation into the Lebanese setting.
So thank you very much, Hazard. Again, I will reiterate that my colleague and I decided to focus on uterine transplantation because we were allotted 20 minutes, so we didn't want to cross over our time limit. So what I'll do now is actually I will, can you hear me, Awalshi? Yes, okay. I will tackle the ethical concerns. So one question that arises when we talk about the problems arising from the possibility of surrogacy or ARTs is whether one has to resort eventually to ectogenesis or not. Next, please. And thank you, Hazar, for turning the slides. So we all know about a number of attempts actually to gestate premature babies. While it's an amazing attempt, and this is an example of such an experiment of having an artificial uterus, if you wish, but it is one way or another like perhaps so far at least Nobel's invention of dynamite. It might have been invented to be used for a noble purpose, but we never knew that it would take us to wars, for example. So the same question arises when it comes to actually inventing or creating or developing artificial uteri. Next, please. So one of the main issues that are faced not only in Lebanon actually, but all over the world is the fact, and that was raised by my colleague from Pakistan earlier on, is the fact that the less advantaged have or find themselves having to rent their womb in order to be able to live, to get some financial backup, if you wish. And the question that arises is whether this is exploitation or an opportunity. And this is what this, among others, of course, makes us think if indeed uterine transplantation, sorry for that, is a better solution. Next, please. So I'm not going to go into detail. You all know this. Human organs are either life-saving or, next please, not life-saving. And when they are not life-saving, the main question that arises is about quality of life. And usually they are done like face transplant, hand transplant, and now people are saying uterine transplant. While not life-saving, but they do save lives in the sense of giving a person a possibility to continue living, i.e. quality of life. So my colleague talked about the breakthrough that took place in Lebanon, in MENA. So the ethical concerns that we like to raise are the following. Next, please. First of all, we are talking a 3 to 5 limit to keep the uterus, which will later be removed or left to disintegrate. So there's a very small, if you want, interval. Next, please. It requires drugs that are dangerous, which means that these drugs can harm the mother and or the fetus. And the other question that comes as a result of this is, if it harms the fetus and the child who is the outcome of a transplanted uterus eventually gets harmed because of this procedure, will that child be suing the parents? Because we've seen trends of children suing parents because they tampered with their genetic makeup. Next, please. Now, of course, we are not discussing the good points because everyone knows them, but very little is mentioned about the tricky issues. So there are also the side effects of surgery, which is the risk-benefit ratio. For example, if you look at the uterine transplant versus the heart transplant, you see the difference in the risk-benefit ratio. There are higher benefits from psychological, cultural perspectives for some. In uterine transplant, there is more than one person involved. So we have a woman and a baby, and of course, there's the donor. Is the child really mine eventually? Is the child mine, or is he or she the child of my mother? Okay, who is the real mother? Does he have two mothers or one mother? Will this affect what he becomes genetically? Will there be lineage confusions? These are all very important questions to ponder. There's also the possibility of future incest, and we've heard laws before by my colleague, I think, yes, again, from Pakistan, when they discussed that, according to Jews, they prefer that the donation be from someone who is not Jewish, so as to ensure there is no incest. But this is an issue to raise. There's a difference between a dead donor and a live donor, and with psychological repercussions, of course. Now, although this is a very good example of one way of solving surrogacy matters or selling one's eggs, we now face another issue, which is the uterus trade or the black trade. So there's always, unfortunately, room for freedom or exploitation. There's the issue of affordability. Will the insurance cover this transfer or this transplant? Will this be available only for those who are well off? Is this a new form of genetics, of eugenics, where only those who have will be able to procreate, if you wish, at the expense of those who cannot afford it? The question of leftover frozen embryos or fetuses, and we discussed this earlier on, what happens to them? Are they destroyed? Are they used for research? Which on its own merits a discussion. It's a really a new kind of warmth. And you all are familiar with the recent birth of twins from embryos that were frozen around 27 years ago. So no one really knows what the repercussions are, but they are there, and the world awaits. So basically, unfortunately, we cannot say that money does not play a role. Money plays a big role in many things, and healthcare is becoming a commodity, and ART is also a commodity, unfortunately. Next, please. And I would like at this point to allude on a very important topic, which is what makes a woman, and we are referring here to cultural constructs. Okay, so childbearing basically is very important for women, particularly in the Middle East. Okay, but questions arises as to whether this actually reduces women to a birth machine, a walking womb without which she will lose her place or her role in society. We have seen, for example, the case of a mother who was brain dead and who was kept on life support because she needed to continue her term in pregnancy and deliver the baby. And there was a commotion as to whether she was being used as a human incubator or not. A woman who cannot procreate and do not have money or cannot resort to ART, will they be seen as less of a woman than not? And this creates a big problem. There's a discrimination against those who cannot conceive. There's harm to women who are forced to undergo IVF or UTX, or else they will be divorced or have to live with another wife. And I know personally someone here in Lebanon who has been his wife has been doing IVF maybe for the 7th or 8th time, because he refuses to believe that the problem is mainly from him. You see, there's always this, if you wish, male society or this society that is actually ruled by male chauvinism. This also leads us to another issue: the menopausal woman viewed as less feminine, while andropausal men are not viewed as less, as having less manhood than not. So I would like to quote here a famous feminist, though I'm not claiming I'm a feminist, Simone de Beauvoir. She describes the woman as someone who gives birth in pain, heals male's wounds, nurses the newborn, and buries the dead. Of man, she knows all that offends his pride and humiliates his will. While inclining before him and submitting flesh to spirit, she remains on the carnal borders of the spirit, because she is seen mainly as a person who is there to bring children about. Next, please. So I would like to end with this quote: by freeing women from the necessity of pregnancy, sex, and reproduction would be uncoupled, which would drastically change the imbalance of power in society. It's basically a social issue. Finally, we came up with a few recommendations. The first one is about informed consent. We need to have true informed consent and ensure that women are not unduly pressured to undergo the uterine transplant, as any ART for that matter. We need funding that prevents discrimination on socioeconomic grounds, so everyone can have access to any ART or means of reproduction to help them reproduce. We need legal guidelines for the status of ectogenetic embryos and fetuses. We need a fair and transparent prioritization list. There need to be a minimum and a maximum age. We've seen stories of women who actually brought children to this world, and these women are 70 and 80 years of age. So they will, as soon as the child starts becoming a teenager, the mother is too old, perhaps, I'm just saying perhaps, to care for him. And this will cause a lot of societal issues and cultural issues and psychological issues and what have you. Another question is whether the child, particularly in this case, is an end in him or herself, or a means for the parents to feel secure. So we need clear laws and regulation, and most importantly, we need to raise awareness about the complexity of such issues. Now, at the end, in the Arab world, there are different laws regulating ART. As you can see, there's Lebanon, Algeria, Bahrain, Egypt, Jordan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Morocco, and Oman. And we really hope that we can somehow reach a consensus amongst all these countries. To begin with, in the Arab regions, since they're classified under the same language, the same culture, if you wish, and then a little bit broader, perhaps, with the EMR and within the EMR, because we're talking about eventually the same creature everywhere, be it here, there, or in another place. So we need solidarity for that. And I guess that's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Dr. Thalia and Dr. Haider, for your presentation, which actually was significantly different from the perspectives of Pakistan and the Islamic Republic of Iran, where you actually reflected on the complexity of the socio-cultural situation in Lebanon. And you said that there are 18 sects, which I know they're not only affecting the health situation, but also the political and economic situation, as we all know. And also we witnessed in this presentation the bioethical perspective, which was quite different from the other two presentations where the OBGYN perspectives were actually shadowing more. The presentation compared the different IVF techniques. It spoke predominantly about the uterine transplantation and the work with Sweden, which started in 2016, and then the first successful transplantation in 2018, and the first successful baby girl in January of 2020. There was also comparison of the surrogacy and the adoption from Islamic and Christian perspectives, and within Islam between the Sunni and Shiite perspectives. The ethical, legal, and social perspectives were then reflected after Dr. Haider by Dr. Arawi, and she spoke in details about the cultural constructs and the importance of childbearing from a cultural perspective, not only in Lebanon, I would have to admit, across the Arab, if not the Islamic world. And she actually also spoke about the recommendations which came in a recent Lebanese law about the informed consent, the funding, the legal guidelines, the fair and transparent privatization, and the age of the mother for uterine transplantation. And finally, compared the different laws in the Arab world, and she called for solidarity. I sincerely hope what she has called for happens, inshallah, one day in our lifetime. I go back to Professor Ahmed Jafari, and actually I understand now that we're moving into the panel discussion, which would be coordinated by Professor Farhat Moazam. So Professor Moazam, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Mandil. So this has been an interesting afternoon, and I think it's been interesting both because of all the speakers. So we started with an overall overview of what are the Muslim positions on ART, etc. And then we had 3 speakers talking about their local issues. These are people who are talking about what is the reality on the ground. Now, because of the interesting talks, we have run a little bit over time. So what we will do is spend maybe 15 to 20 minutes on having some of the questions for our speakers. And Ms. Saleha has been doing a yeoman's job here with me, trying to pick out. We have had a lot of questions on chat, and also a lot of questions that were kind of sent to us written while the talks were going on. So it's great to see Professor Sarur, you're back with us. Welcome again. There were a lot of questions that your talk has raised. We'll talk about some of them. A lot of these questions were really because people want to know more. So we'll start with a couple of questions. We've tried to group them together. And this is from Dr. Thalia and also Dr. Arsalan. So both of them were interested essentially about what you talked about, the shift. So that here is, as one person asked, is there a scientific basis of determination of ensoulment at 120 days versus now 40 days, which is something that you talked about. And it connected to that, the opinion that it is at 14 days when the embryo is confirmed. And connected to that, Dr. Thalia also said, wanted to know, so is personhood and ensoulment now considered by jurists as starting 14 days from conception? Maybe you could elaborate a little bit on this?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dalia, for well, actually, the ensoulment is either 120 days, or some authorities it is 40 days or 42 days. The fact that 14 days, that is not for ensoulment, that is when the embryo becomes an individual, a potential individual, because after 14 days, the embryo cannot divide. So it becomes the person who is there at the age of 14 days. And that's why the meeting, which was held in Cairo and organized by the Islamic Organization of Medical Science, WHO, and Al-Azhar, and Arab countries, it was agreed that research on embryo can be performed, or manipulation of embryos like genetic testing or so, can be performed up to 14 days, but not. This does not mean that ensoulment occurs at 14 days. No, still ensoulment, according to the texts which we have, it is either at 120 days or at 42 days. So please, there should not be mix up between these two things.
Okay, can I follow up on that? So, Dr. Sarur, the issue of, if the word is used, that the embryo is an individual, the individuality of the embryo. But as a scientist, if we look at it, as soon as conception occurs,
yes,
that in itself, that entity has an individuality scientifically based on the genetic makeup that it has received from its parents, and that's individual.
Yeah,
so,
that's absolutely, you know, and this is, of course, the belief of the Catholic Church, you know, at the moment, that's an individual, you know, but, you know, at this stage, it ought to have the respect of the individual, but you cannot consider it as an individual so long as you are performing some procedure for the benefit of the embryo or for the benefit of the mother. But certainly, I mean, even the sperm or the egg, human being, once fertilization occurs, it is a potential. So since the time of fertilization, yes, the fertilized egg embryo in its very early stage is considered as a potential human being, and it has to do, we have to pay it all the full respect. No doubt about this. Yeah.
Okay. There were a couple of other questions which came up also with some of the other talks. And that was the issue of adoption, which was raised a few times. And so as one person asked, that it's still confusing, which is adoption. I'm confused about it. Can this be justified within the Islamic context?
Yeah, absolutely. Adoption is permitted in Islam, but you are allowed to adopt an orphan and bring up the orphan and give the orphan every rights you would like to give, but you cannot give the orphan your name. And this, that if you give the orphan your name, then there might be mixing of genes in coming generations or along the time. So it does not forbid, Islam does not forbid adoption, but it forbids giving the name to the adopted child.
So that particular adopted child, however, would not therefore have the same inheritance rights as your own genetic child would. Am I correct?
Yes, absolutely, unless if the parents make their will, that their wills will be divided equally between their own genetic child and the adopted child. It is up to the parents to decide this concerning the inheritance. But legally, you cannot consider them, you cannot consider the adopted child as a child of the non-genetic parents.
Okay, and just the last question, because then I think we will move on to some of the questions for the others. And that is, recently there was a case that twins were born after almost 27 years from a frozen embryo. Would this be considered okay, even by Muslim jurists?
Absolutely, yeah, because genetically they belong to the parents. The problem is that's when you transfer, if you find them fine, when you do thawing, that's the warming of the embryos after freezing. If you find them okay and you transfer them, there is no harm about this, but you have to consider the age of the mother at the time of return of the embryo, because by that time the mother to be able to cope with the pregnancy and the pregnancy risk. But if the caring physician explained to her all the involved risk, that no problem, and there is no objection from Islam to transfer the embryos after this long period of time.
Okay, thank you. So again, as I said, there were other questions, but maybe we can move on to the next speaker, which was Dr. Sadia.
I just want to thank you very much. You know, I'm sorry for the delay, but I have been struggling with the net. I'm sorry about this.
No. We are actually grateful. We know that you're also in the middle of traveling, and we really do appreciate your contribution to the seminar. Thank you very much from all of us.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Dr. Sadia, it was interesting. Again, a fair number of questions. The focus of Dr. Sadia, the focus, you spoke about a lot of different areas, but the questions to your focus again was the local social values, and you gave us information about the sex selection. So there's some of the questions that came up, and I'm bringing the questions together because of the lack of time. So you mentioned the Council of Islamic Ideology approving of sex selection. And you also mentioned that there is a legislation in Pakistan that allows sex selection, a legislation. And there was a curiosity, could you talk a little bit more? Is this just the Council of Islamic Ideology, or is there a legislation that says, that's fine, go ahead with sex selection?
This came up with this surrogacy case in 2015, which went on for 2 years. And I'm myself not very 100% sure, because that recommendation came from the judgment, you know, when they disallowed surrogacy. So the Council of Islamic Ideology says it's fine. But the legislation, I don't think it's fully there, but it approves of the Council of Islamic Ideology judgment.
Yeah, our legislatures will approve of anything that comes from there without really thinking about it.
Yes, although if you see in that judgment, the doctor from the consultant from Lahore is disapproving of it. But nevertheless, the Islamic...
I think in that judgment, the thing that occurred also was, as you said, it was given to the surrogate mother, but the mother actually said she was married to the guy at that time. And so the judgment was interesting, gave the child, therefore, to the surrogate and not to the biological mother. Connected to this, there was...
Dr. Moazam, Dr. Moazam, may I add to this discussion, please? Because this is very important.
Yes, please.
You know, I think, you know, we did actually discuss this at length in several meetings with the religious leaders and all this. And we came up with the recommendation, which I probably showed in one of my slides, that sex selection is permitted, provided that it does not involve prejudice against one sex or another. In other words, you cannot provide it for the selection of the first child in the family, or you cannot provide it for selection of the sex of the child if the family has both sexes in the family. What is the percentage of the girls, or what is the percentage of boys? And you cannot do it only for the choice of one sex only, as happened in China and others, where they have chosen only the male sex only. And you do it in a way that does not involve the prejudice to one sex or another. If you do it, that's fine in this way. But if you leave it freely, then certainly there will be huge misuse of this issue.
Yes, thank you. Actually, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. And the rationale behind is that if you don't do it for such families with these conditions, which I mentioned, then either the wife would go on repeated pregnancies, which would involve high risk of high parity with increased maternal mortality and morbidity, or the husband might divorce her because he also has advice from his mother and his relative, go and marry another woman and she'll get you a boy, or he might go and get married to another one if his religion allows polygamy. So rationale behind permitting sex selection in these cases. Thank you. Sorry for interruption.
No, that's okay. Thank you for your input. Actually, what you have said just now, Dr. Sarur, about the guidelines for the sex selection was actually what I was going to raise with the second question, a kind of a bunch of questions, in which that, so the Islamic, the Council of Islamic Ideology has said it's okay, go ahead. And we're certainly, as a center, we're interested, we're going to see if we can locate that. But the question that comes up is, as you've pointed out beautifully, our context is very different. The social values here are different. However, it seems as though the primary guidelines that are being used by OBGYN folks over here is a reliance on international guidelines. So the question, therefore, then to you is, within the context of our lives, etc., here, would it not be important for, if not the government, but at least for the associations of OBGYN folks to come up with guidelines as far as sex selection is concerned, and based on some of the things that Dr. Sarur has said? Because you yourself said that you were uncomfortable initially.
Yes, and I think this is, coming to this meeting has really helped me as well in many ways. And Professor Sarur's talk gives me a lot of hope as well, that, we can do so many things under the umbrella of Islam, and which are fine scientifically as well. I mean, research, etc. So the point you're raising is very, very pertinent. There is a dire need. I think CBEC could really help our gynae society.
Okay.
We want, like he also rightly pointed out, you don't want the legal fraternity in the first place.
Right.
We as scientists, we as human beings, we as ethicists need to come up with, we know our society, we know the problems women face, and we need to come up with our own guidelines. And only after that we can involve the legal fraternity. And Islam, let's not forget, Islam is a religion which allows self-interpretation. Yeah,
It depends on which scholar you.
Exactly. So it allows you direct communication with Allah. Right. And your own interpretation of Quran. So many people many Muslims don't think that polygamy is legal or allowed in Islam. In Tunisia, polygamy is illegal. I'd like to have that in every Muslim country.
I think most women would. I'm not sure what men would think.
Men won't, but I'm sure. But
all right. So we look forwards then
Yes.
as to something coming out from within the OBGYN group, and sure, we'd be happy to help.
Yes, and I would be happy. I'm sure the IVF Center experts would love to come together, and this would be an amazing document. You know.
We shall. I think that would really, if that comes out of this seminar, I think that would be great.
I pledge to help in any way I can.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to Dr. Sagar. Dr. Sagar, are you with us? Yes. Yes? Yeah. Okay. So, Dr. Sagar, the question that is posed to you is, and I think you alluded to the fact that of the commercialization that is present where egg donation is concerned. So Iran faced the same issue of commercialization of live organ donations, particularly the kidneys. And it took some very good steps to try and control that. So the question to you is, within Iran, have there been, as you're pointing out, that these cases are coming up, has there been some movement into looking at the possibility of getting commercialization of egg donation better controlled?
Thank you very much for this question. By Iranian law, selling the egg or the sperm is forbidden. But in some centers, especially the people who are far from the center, sometimes they do this kind of selling egg or even embryo. We don't have sperm donation. Sometimes it's done, but is not by the law, and is something that is obscure and is ignored sometimes by the people who even knows about it.
Okay, all right, thank you. There could be so much discussion on that, but I have an eye on the clock. So thank you very much. It was interesting to find out the situation in Iran. So let me move on to the last presentation by Dr. Thalia and Dr. Hazar. Very interesting, because I think many people sitting here did not realize that uterine transplantation, Lebanon is one of the places where it is taking place. So Dr. Thalia, you raised an interesting point, which is, you said in one of your slides, it's a social issue. And I think it is. Would you like to comment a little bit more about that? Because if you look at it, it is based on the importance for women to be mothers and the stigma connected to women who cannot have children. So one way, as you said, which was to bring in informed consent and some of the other ways to regulate it better. But this is certainly a transplant, which is not to save her life. In this particular area, therefore, would you think perhaps it would be something to look at the social factors rather than the regulatory factors of making sure about informed consent, etc.? I was just curious what you thought about that.
So thank you very much, Dr. Moazam. To begin with, I apologize for not being able to turn my video on because I'm on 4G, and the length of the net is very precarious. So now, yes, regarding the question that you raised, indeed, in many ways, it is a social issue in the sense that, first of all, it is an invasive procedure. It is a serious operation. And some women feel indirectly coerced into it because if they don't try to get a child one way or another, assuming other things considered that didn't work out, they will end up being divorced, for example, or having to live with another woman as the second wife. And now, if I'm not mistaken, a while back, my student and I, Zaid Tawil, we did publish a study or an article actually on UTI and the social constructions of the Middle East. A woman is basically a childbearer. It is shifting a little bit, it is changing a little bit, but it's basically it. And this indirect threat oftentimes forces women to do things that probably they don't want to do, like this poor someone I heard about actually, who had to do 8 IVFs so far, because basically it is the husband who cannot, whose sperms are quite weak. We just don't accept that it's the fault of someone who is not the woman, if you wish. I hope I answered your question, Professor Moazam.
Yes, kind of. I guess we have clinicians sitting here, and the issue is the gynecologists, etc. Where do their responsibilities lie? Where the infertility is because of the husband, rather than the woman. But these are very, very complicated issues. But as you've pointed out, a lot of these issues are social issues, and ethics is very much a social discipline. It's not just something where we have universal principles. In the final analysis, they have to be applied. So I think, as I said, we could go on, but it's time we stopped. And this has been, from my point of view, I've moderated panel discussions. This has been among one of the very, very interesting ones, very relevant ones. So I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Mandil now. So Dr. Mandil, it's been a good afternoon, really good afternoon. So may I turn it over back to you, please?
Thanks very much, Professor Moazam. I think the first day of this webinar was simply excellent. The webinar was actually looking at the scientific and ethical challenges in human reproduction from different perspectives in the Eastern Mediterranean region. They started by a very comprehensive presentation on opinions of Muslim scholars and fuqaha regarding modern reproductive technologies, delivered by the former dean of the Al-Azhar College of Medicine, Professor Jamal Surur. This was followed by 3 different presentations about the artificial reproductive technology perspectives and experiences from 3 countries of the region. And these 3 countries actually host the 3 collaborating centers on bioethics with the World Health Organization. We listened to the Pakistani perspective from Professor Sadiya Pal, the Iranian perspective from Professor Saghar Salehpour, and the Lebanese perspective from Dr. Thali Arawi and Dr. Hazar Haidar. And actually, this was followed by a panel discussion moderated by Professor Farhat Moazam, and we learned a lot about the different perspectives about the ART and human reproduction from perspectives which are social, which are cultural, which are ethical, which are religious. We listened to comparisons among Muslims, comparing Sunni with Shia sects and the great differences between them. We also listened to the Christian and Jewish perspectives, and I think we all learned a lot today. And this will take us probably to the second day, which I'm asking Professor Ahmed Jafari to tell us about what happens tomorrow afternoon, inshallah. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, and the World Health Organization Regional Office in Cairo has the best for all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mandil, and thank you for the Cairo office for having organized the webinar, which has actually worked without any glitches. And I would also like to thank two people who made this possible from our end, which is Mr. Farid bin Masood, who is doing all the tech work in the background, which is certainly beyond my capacity, and Ms. Swaleha Shekhani, who's been collecting all the information together. In the back, further in the background is Mr. Amir Shehzad, who has put on all the hardware and software together for us, for this thing to happen, and will keep on happening tomorrow. So you're not off the hook. Tomorrow again, inshallah, we'll meet at Pakistan time 2 p.m. with another set of presenters with very, very exciting talks. Thank you, and Khuda Hafiz.